I'll find that blooper and send it to you, Daryl. It is, oh my God, it's one of my favorites. Whew. So we started? Yes. They're
We're
coming in. They're
live,
coming
yeah.
in.
We're live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome
Good
back to
morning.
day 4, final day of getting started in security with BHIS and MITRE attack with Patterson. I was just trying to say Miterson.
What is the Matterson? Yes,
yeah.
perfect.
It's
Hey, I'm the only one who can make up words around here.
okay. Noted. I will know that for next time. So welcome back, everybody that's coming in. Hopefully everybody is ready to secure things, learn all kinds of fun, interesting things with Patterson today.
Yeah.
Look, see, they're ready to party. They're ready to dance. It's Thursday. So that's Friday Eve. It's nice.
It is Friday. You know that.
Oh yeah.
You just refuse to move ahead.
Crappy weather. So you could
Yeah, don't come to Friday. It's wet and horrible.
Yeah, it is the final countdown. Haircut fish. Thank you.
That's unavoidable.
Yeah. But see, Brian, you don't feel well, so you can use the crappy weather in the weekend to just like be lazy and not do anything.
Oh, I fully intend to.
Nice.
If I could just train these two to go and get the food and drinks without eating it on the way back, I'd be good.
Yes.
Labrador's food. Yeah, what could go wrong?
Yeah, nothing.
Oh,
yes, it
cute
is.
papa.
Ed, you're welcome for putting that in your head. You're welcome. I get songs stuck in my head all the time too. So
Papa photos are the best.
Yeah.
Look, it's a white lab and a black lab. Yeah. Use a strawberry lab.
A strawberry lab. What's that? Is that like
The strawberry labs are a golden lab that has a I'll say variation in their coloring where it's got like a red over here sort of thing. So
Oh,
they're not.
I wonder. I think over here we call those like Chesapeake retrievers.
You're bound to have some different name for them over there.
Well, yeah, I mean, we just make stuff up over here. That's just how we take it over and we make stuff up. So. And Patterson makes up words, so
we sort of think a golden lab and then put a almost like a.
Is it wavy?
No, he's fairly short, straight hair, but he's just got a red tinge with the orange. And in some lights he's really golden, and other lights you can really see the red tinge, and it's just the best lovable Velcro dog out there.
Oh, haircut fish. That was a terrible dad joke, but it's Father's Day weekend coming up, so we'll allow it.
I'm waiting for the GIF on that haircut fish.
Yeah. Aw.
That is a great.
I'll give haircut fish about 5 minutes and there'll be a GIF of it.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. Ed's picture is that's pretty awesome. I like that one.
Yeah. They're so cute. Dogs,
Dogs are magic.
Sometimes we don't deserve their love and appreciation.
Oh, we totally don't deserve their love, but
yeah.
I saw somewhere that the dogs are the only animal that jumped across the divide to be with man.
Haircut fish. You used that joke in a meeting yesterday. How'd it go? Did it come back and bite you? Yuck, yuck, yuck. So it looks like people are rolling in. Again, this is not the actual training yet. If anybody has any questions outstanding from yesterday, feel free to ask. We got about 3 minutes until we start. Oh, you only got one laugh.
That's not bad, actually. That's better than I might have.
See, we're all just completely immature and we think it's hilarious. So you get more laughs over here with us.
It's all about knowing your audience.
Yes. Read the room. Couldn't find an appropriate emoji for that joke. Yeah, I've accidentally posted a GIF that was completely inappropriate. I didn't realize it until after, like, you know how on Discord it only shows you like the beginning parts of the GIF? Well, it turned into something else. And oh my gosh, I was horrified. I was like trying to delete. It was this, of course, it was out there. Like there, and I'm like, how do I delete this thing? It was like, and people were like, you know, everybody was like, you know, putting that GIF in there. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was the worst. Oh, yes, we do have bandanas. It's usually pretty much just for staff. I don't know if anyone else had this problem, but I couldn't connect to the session using smb.bat. Do you see that, Patterson?
I do, and I'm not exactly sure what it's referring to be 100% frank.
So 504 MSF underscore restore dot bat, which is located on the desktop. They had to, it told him to delete that.
Jeff, tell us what lab that is, if you don't mind. Don't make me figure stuff out on my own this morning. Come on.
Yes, come on. Like, don't do that to him already.
If anybody has that issue,
wait until 3:30 this afternoon for him to do that.
Yeah.
The responder lab.
Okay, well, we're going to go through it in just a minute, so that it will become abundantly clear. Maybe,
right,
perhaps,
sweet.
Probably. Let's hope. Thank you. Thank you, though.
Sweet. Well, it looks like we are nearing the top of the hour when class actually officially starts. So hopefully everybody is ready with their coffee, water, snacks, all the things that you need to get started with. Oh, he posted a screenshot. Thank you, Jeff. Or sorry if we're pronouncing it wrong. And we will go ahead and get started here, and we will go backstage and we will let you get going. Let us know if you need anything.
Will do. Thank you.
See you later.
And away we go. Or something. Okay. Good morning. Welcome back. Day 4. It's been a productive few days together. And let's see. I am making sure my slides are shared. It just the old format. You have this slide memorized anyway, truth be told. But yeah, welcome back. Welcome to day 4. And you know, I don't think I speak solely for myself at this point, but well, a lot of mental energy goes into this process. You know, for you, for me, for all the folk involved, and you get into day 3 or 4 and start running out of steam a little bit. So today we're gonna keep it interesting and lively, and do our best to maximize the remaining time we have together. You know, as per usual, I can't say this enough. So thankful to the folks manning and monitoring the tech support channel, to the folks who help set up the audio video. This is quite a production, especially with the multiplicity of streaming options, and just really cool. Lots of stuff going into this. In some ways, I feel like I have the easy part. I just show up and talk for a while. So again, thank you to all the folks who support this effort. Just could not imagine doing it without them. And of course, wouldn't be here if you weren't all here. So thank you so much. And let's kind of pick up where we left off yesterday. Just a real quick summary, and then we'll jump into the slow walkthrough of the 2 labs that we ended yesterday's session on. We're continuing our adventure of mapping critical controls to practical tactical opportunities, art of the possible to improve the security posture in your org. And man, the whole concept is near and dear to my heart, and I love the idea, of course, of moving the needle. I think that's largely what motivates a lot of us, is just making that forward progress. The enterprise is a little more secure today than it was yesterday, so to speak, and that's what this is all about, and all based, of course, on extensive real world experience. And we know this is not everything. You know that. We know that this is not all the things, but it is a tremendous place to start, and some really, really high value opportunities to improve your security posture that I think, overall are not terribly difficult, not terribly onerous, not terribly expensive, at least at the outset. So once again, fundamentally, foundationally, we're looking at this MITRE attack framework and a huge, sort of overwhelming number of potential tactics. And instead of cherry picking and trying to fix 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, we're looking at painting broad strokes. What can we do to maximize prevention? And we started off with application allow listing, and potentially a little bit surprised at how easy and how effective it can be just to do directory allow listing, Windows, program files. Huge difference. Accessible, likely built into your operating systems, again, assuming you're using Windows. Just a huge leap forward in prevention of some significant attack vectors. We talked about passwords. That's not new. That's nothing new to all of you, but just talk about just the simple improvement in lengthy passwords, MFA, etc. We talked about how important egress traffic analysis, outbound internet connectivity, the ability to monitor and visualize potential command and control communications to and from your environment. User behavior analytics, because that's just easier to say than UEBA. The idea that we're collecting the information about how our users behave now, if we could centralize it, stack it, analyze it, look for trends, extremely valuable visibility capability from my perspective. We talked about logging, some of the challenges thereof, some of the limited value of inherent logging functionality in Windows. Talked about Sysmon for the win. We like Sysmon. Dovetailed nicely into the advanced endpoint protection conversation. And this one, again, is just near and dear to my heart as an incident responder. Having the ability to see visibility capabilities on your endpoints, and then the ability to contain, it's just monumentally important. And once again, I think this is, in some ways, all of these are becoming your due diligence. And by due diligence, basically, I mean things you should be doing, so you better get them done. This is just akin to responsible infrastructure security management, I think. Then we finished yesterday's conversation by talking about host firewalls. You probably have them. They're probably off. That's a generalization, but we see that in lots of enterprises that they're accessible. Software host-based firewalls are accessible from a Windows, Linux, varied operating system perspective, but they're often off in some ways because of the erroneous assumption that it's just too hard to manage them, and then combined with the idea that there's just not that much value. And so we sort of paused there at the end of yesterday and said, let's prove this out. Let's see what your Windows workstation or your Linux workstation looks like with firewalls down. And then let's retest with firewalls up and visualize the difference of the ports that are now accessible or inaccessible based on that change. And monumentally significant, we're talking about limiting lateral movement from a host firewall perspective. Talked a little bit about segmentation, etc. And what we're saying is, there's a pretty high likelihood at some point you're going to have a compromised endpoint in your environment. It's just probably going to happen. And if it happens and you can isolate it to a small subset of your internal systems, your internal environment, then that's huge. That's huge. Back to my submarine analogy. I know you're dying to see that picture again today. That if we can even do some macro segmentation, limit port 445, limit port 3389 or port 22, et cetera, that we can make huge, huge improvements, once again, in limiting the threat actor's ability to move laterally east-west in your environment, potentially limit their ability to distribute things like ransomware if we block 445. Super, super useful. So we're not done. We have a handful of categories to cover today. We got a pretty good chunk of slides today and only a couple labs. So it'll be fun to manage today's schedule. We'll talk about some sort of additive extracurricular labs along the way. And once again, I think probably we'll get done just a little early enough for another Q&A session. So if you've got, ask me anything kinds of ideas rolling around in your head, note, and then we'll come back and talk about those hopefully at the end of the day. We're going to talk about internet allow listing. We're going to talk about vulnerability management, AD or Active Directory hardening, and backup and recovery is not inherent to this class. We just knew that's important, especially in today's environments, especially with things like ransomware lurking. This is usually not, backup recovery is usually not part and parcel of InfoSec's purview, potentially. Hopefully by the end of this conversation, if you weren't already prepared, you're at least prepared to say backup and recovery is our insurance blanket. This is important, and having an educational conversation with the folks the server storage system folks, whoever that might be in your enterprise, we'll leave that to you. All right. So without further ado, let's step through host firewalls and Nmap together, and then responder together, and we'll see what we can see. I know there were a few challenges there yesterday, so hopefully this works well. I have yet to actually poke the VM much today, so we'll find out. I know a few of you encountered today's issue, some of the things that I encountered yesterday, which is thank you very much, Microsoft. No matter how hard I try, I can't kill Windows Update, at least not long term, and I think I've got it solved, and then it comes back to life, rears its ugly head at the least convenient moment, such as life. Opportunity to learn and grow, tech support and troubleshooting. So let's see what happens. It'll probably be fine. I'm back, of course, at the intro labs menu, and we're going to go to host firewalls and Nmap and work our way through this together. All right. So terminal as admin. First hurdle of the day. If you can't get there, don't forget, you can get there discreetly by going to start, searching for the individual item, launching as admin. That will work just fine. We're going to open a command prompt. We're going to confirm the IP address of our Windows system, our Windows host. We'll make note of that. We're going to open WSL. And I know this is a little confusing. It always is. And I'm pretty sure it's the way my brain works. Maybe it's the way your brain works. And I hope not to insult you by saying that. But our brains might work similarly in that you're going through this step-by-step and you're taking each step literally. You're trying really hard to follow the syntax and map the syntax. And then we get to the point where your address needs to be inserted into the process. And just the way, again, my brain works, I'm going step by step by step. And it's easy to get confused by, wait, which which address goes in here. So no harm, no foul, and just pay attention to that, of course, as we go through, and we'll gently remind one another of the process. We're trying to scan ourselves, right? Well, we're trying to use Nmap, a network mapping tool, a port scanning tool, a really cool tool. If this is your initial foray using Nmap, then I think you're going to like it. One of my favorite things about Nmap, by the way, is if I just type Nmap and mash enter, has really solid help. It is linear in terms of how you probably want to use the tool, and extremely beneficial. So if you're new, you have extra time today, you want to play around, just mashing the typing Nmap and mashing enter gives you a pretty good summary of how this tool works. And there's a lot of power in this tool. And of course, you can visit nmap.org to learn more. I like it. It's pretty cool. This is, again, really just an exercise, not so much in learning Nmap as it is in saying what's accessible, firewall up, firewall down. So we're going to move to root. Nmap, among many other things, when it comes to Linux, Nmap interacts differently with your TCP/IP stack, with your network communications, whether you're standard user versus root or UID 0. So it's important when you're using Nmap that you're aware of the level of privilege you have. If you have root level privilege, then Nmap can do things that are sort of against the rules for standard users when interacting with the TCP/IP stack. So that does make a little bit of difference. Nmap will still work as a standard user. It just works differently and potentially with less functionality. So remember, we're going to scan ourselves. And let's see, who were we? Where were we? Let's do this one. I like copy and paste. Nmap and mash enter. And if you're impatient, you can hit keys on the keyboard. You can increase verbosity, decrease verbosity, view status. You know, sometimes this is super useful, sometimes it's not. 39.5%. It gives me something to do. I guess I kind of like that. Is it making progress? And it's worthwhile if you're doing a largish scan to get an idea of what's happening. So by default, when we run Nmap without any other port specifications, it will scan the top 1,000 ports based on statistical analysis. Fyodor and crew who maintain Nmap, not 0 through 1,000 or 1 through 1,000, but the top ports that are in use on the internet, so to speak, like 80, 443, 445, etc. So it looks like my firewall is on since we scanned all 1,000, and looks like we actually targeted my Windows desktop, so to speak, and I got nothing. So let's see. Let's carry on with this process, and let's go back and see if we can do CLS clear screen, and if we do netsh ADV firewall, set all profiles state off. I'll go back to on in a minute. I apologize. Obviously, this is going to be varied for you. Talk about real world. My firewall is on for some reason. I promise. I did not click the please turn the firewall on, but so be it. In truth, let's do this first. Let's take a short foray into the joys of netsh. This can be an interactive prompt, and it can be useful. I'll show you why. If we do netsh, you can see I switched to a netsh prompt. The thing I like about this is that it can be somewhat self-directed. If you're not sure which command to use, what exactly you can accomplish, you can just drop to a netsh prompt, and then you can take a look at the available commands. What things can you do with netsh? Well, obviously a lot. This is where we're headed, right? So I can now see, oh, look, there's an ADV firewall command, and I can do that command followed by question mark, and then I get context-sensitive help. So I can work my way through this process of how to interact with this as a tool, which is kind of nice because you may or may not remember. I can do an up arrow to pull back. I can say, what am I trying to do? Well, at this point, how about show? How about show? ADV firewall space show space question mark. Again, the context deepens and it says, here are the available commands to run in conjunction with ADV firewall show, and I can do all profiles. And this should give me a quick clue of off, off, on. And what's important about this, you have by default, of course, on an enterprise edition, you've got these 3 components, or professional edition. You have public, private, and domain. And sadly, it looks like, I am in fact blocking inbound connections. Bummer. I'm going to go back. I'm going to do CLS, and then I'm going to follow sort of the lab more carefully. ADV firewall. Did I spell it right? I did. Set all profiles state. Let's do off, since I started. And then let's do Control L, up arrow, and let's try again. Yes. So firewall on, can't see any of these ports. Firewall off, unsurprisingly, I can see these ports. Why these ports? I talked a little bit yesterday about what does a port mean, and I think it's a kind of an unfortunate name on a certain level, in that I think a lot of folks who are new to this concept, they immediately visualize like a physical port and or a hard-coded designation, and that's not really what it is. Really, again, I think maybe calling it a service mapping is a little easier to understand. And so you can see here 139 for for protocol TCP is NetBIOS, is primarily for NetBIOS name resolution, and or most of these are related somehow to SMB, file share access, authentication, etc. And we don't want these things necessarily exposed to the world. So naturally, we're going to consider, once again, let's go back, let's turn. Like remote desktop, just for example. That is not always the case. Right now, we're looking at default configuration, which is just a handful of ports. And I feel like I just lost my screen share. Did I lose my screen share? Can you see my screen? Anyone? Okay, I'm gonna believe you. Carry on. Back now, gone, good, thumbs up. Well, I'm just gonna keep on trucking because that's how much faith I have in all the backstage folk. So you can just listen to the sound of my voice regardless. So this is important. I'll stop beating that proverbial dead horse. This is important, and as mentioned yesterday, this is getting just a little bit more technical, a little deeper, a little more into the weeds, but it's important to ask yourself, in the context of your business, in the context of your environment, do these ports need to be allowed inbound on your endpoints? On your workstations, the answer is probably no. On your file servers, on your Active Directory domain controllers, that's a different situation, a different story. But that really becomes the question. Can you reduce your attack surface by eliminating access to these ports? And for sure you can. So let's see. I think we're supposed to end this with the firewall off, if I'm not mistaken. So let's go back to off. Up arrow for the win. Hey, turn on your firewall. No, ain't gonna do it. Can't make me. All right, and then we will go back, continue this discussion, so to speak. by looking at responder. And just back up a little bit before we dig into this lab. Remember, so first lesson effectively is, does a firewall make a difference? Yes or no? And technically speaking, the answer is yes. Related to MITRE attack, the answer is yes. And do you already have one? Yes, in most instances. The next portion of this conversation is to just demonstrate what bad things might happen if you're not using a firewall. And in this example, basically, we're imagining that our Linux system for this lab, our Linux system is a compromised host. There's a threat actor or a pen tester on our Linux system inside our environment, and we don't have firewalls enabled on our Windows system, so what could go wrong? We are going to focus for this lab on LLMNR enabled by default on I hesitate to say legacy versions of Windows, but it is being deprecated on the most current versions of Windows based on recent updates moving forward. So we expect to see LLMNR off more and more and more. If you've had a pen test in your environment anytime in the last 5 years, this has probably been highlighted. Responder is just a sort of a ubiquitous tool. Once again, it's sort of the pen test due diligence to confirm or deny that multicast name resolution is enabled or not. And as you'll see when we step through this, it's kind of a big deal. Mentioned yesterday that as this is further and further deprecated, as we're moving away from broadcast name resolution, multicast name resolution, that does not obviate the value of responder. Responder is in continuous development, and we're beginning to move. We're seeing additional functionality in responder for other technologies. There have always been a few other things. WPAD came up yesterday, which is sort of like automatic proxy configuration for browsers, like DHCP for browsers, kind of, which is something that can also be exploited with this tool. We're seeing additional features and functions as it pertains to IP version 6, because there's a fair amount of multicast underlying traffic going on with the IP version 6 protocol that potentially can be at least illuminating and then in some cases abused. So terminal is admin, Ubuntu. Let's see where we find ourselves. We've already done this. We're already root. You can see that by the cool little pound symbol, dare I say hashtag. Control L. Then we're going to move to responder, tab completion for the win. We're going to run the responder Python. We're going to specify our interface. This is important, especially if you have a system with multiple network interfaces. We want to tell responder which interface to use. In this case, we're going to use Ethernet 0. We mash enter, and as mentioned yesterday, some red is normal. We're not enabling some of these features and functions. There's a lot more granularity, of course, if you dig into how to use this tool. Right now, we're just using it sort of utilitarian to illustrate the value of a firewall. So don't be shocked if you see that some of these are off. You may want to come and play with this again later. Please recognize that if you go back to your corporate environment and you fire this up on a LAN connected endpoint, that you are disrupting normal network communications. You're disrupting potentially multicast communications in your environment. So don't just do this haphazardly or without some consideration or in an unisolated environment, because things could go bad, go wrong. So in this next step, we're going to basically try and kick off or invoke broadcast name resolution. And again, it's kind of silly, and this will come up repeatedly. How Windows promiscuously authenticates to things. It authenticates for almost everything. And it's crazy how eager it is to say, here's my password hash. And so this is an example of that. We can put in anything we want here. Doesn't really matter as long as it's something Windows doesn't have inherently recognized or cached. It's going to say, I need to figure out where is this system called anything you want here, anything we want here, or no, as the case may be. And I hit enter, and I should see that I am doing broadcast name resolution. We see it right there, if you can see it in passing, saying poisoned answer. So my workstation says, hey, who out there is named anything we want here? And generally speaking, we're not going to get a reasonable answer, but responder is hanging out saying, that's me. Doesn't matter what I put in there. Responder says, that's me. And as you can see, we're hoping against hope that we capture authentication, including NTLM password hash representation. And ultimately, Windows goes, can't find it. Sorry. And we should see some capture data as per the screen. The verbosity of on-screen output is a little bit varied sometimes. We'll do Control-C. You can see an error and exception here. That's totally okay. We're going to do Control-C. We're going to do CD logs. And this is the log subdirectory in the responder directory. We can do an LS here just to see what we can see. And obviously, not obviously, may not be obvious. Responder, one of the features and functions of Responder is that it will create a unique output file based on the responder that's in play. So we, through this process, invoked the NTLM version 1. And so if we go cat HTTP tab version, let's do 1, tab completion. So that should be, again, my IP address, the IP address of my Windows workstation, which looks correct. And if we cat or display on screen the output, we should see, look, here is the capture of the NTLM components, username, host name, hash value. And then from there, I'll do Control L just to clean up the screen a little bit. We can invoke John the Ripper, a password cracking utility. We're going to run John. We're going to specify the format equals I should spell it right. Net NTLM version 2. Current directory. Whoops. Tab completion. We'll put in the 2 there instead of the 1, since that's what we're calling for in the lab, or 1. Fascinating. We did both. That's useful. I guess we'll start with 2 since we're following the instructions, and see what happens. This is good. I mean, it's good in the sense that it's illustrative. So what happened? I gave it a hash. We just saw the hash just a second ago. Let's just confirm. Am I just wrong? Let's make sure that this one is not empty. I think that was already resident. That's not me. Which is okay. That works too. Let's go back and let's do version 1 for the sake of argument. HTTP 1. Okay. So sorry, dance around a little bit. A couple things need to happen here. Obviously, we need to make sure we're looking at the right file associated with the right IP address. And in this instance, that was just a tiny confusing. But this value, we can confirm. Check this out. We go back. Does that look like me? And the answer is yes, it does. We need to confirm the protocol. Responder is nice enough to put that in the file name. Thank you very much. And then we just need to tell John specifically in the case of net NTLM version 1 or version 2. If I do that again, let's do one more experiment. I'm going to repeat that exact command. And if I get no password hashes found, I'm like, wait, okay, I know I just gave it a hash. What is happening? As you may recall, there is this thing called a pot file. And the pot file tracks hashes that John or Hashcat, as the case may be, has already cracked. And doing you a favor, being efficient, if you will, John checks the pot file and says, you already did this, so I'm not going to waste your time, waste compute resources, and try and crack it again. And so in this case, if we want to crack it again, we're going to have to remove the John the Ripper run John.pot file. So I'm going to delete that file and then try again. And then if all was right in the world, now John goes, oh, I don't recognize that. Go ahead and crack it. I'm going to move this out of the way for just a second. Somebody answered that already? Okay, anyway. Excellent. Yeah, and in both instances, you can do the ATT&CK show command. I think maybe that was referencing that. You can leave that file there and or do ATT&CK show and then reveal the hashes, the passwords that have already been cracked. We're hoping to avoid that for you just to make life a little simpler. All right. But wait, of course, there's more. Now we've gained this super secret username password combination. What legitimately would a threat actor or a pen tester do next? So we've proven that having your firewall down is not a great idea. We've proven that we can abuse normal Windows functionality default, at least in this case, Windows 10 in particular, abuse broadcast name resolution. We've acquired a password hash. And now, once again, with the firewall down, what evil can we propagate? So let's pop to a new Ubuntu terminal. We will become root yet again. We are going to open MSF console. Consider running update. Come on. Any minute now. Look away. It's shy. Yeah, so we're working on the responder lab now. We just did the firewalls and nmap. That's all we have accomplished so far today. So we're well into the end, nearing the end of the responder. We've captured hashes. We're going to see if we can make use of said hashes. We're going to use, not ICE, use exploit Windows SMB PSExec. As mentioned yesterday, this is a PSExec-like utility. We're going to invoke that tool. We're going to set payload, tab completion, Windows, tab complete. Tab completion is just slow in this. That's okay. Set our payload to the now somewhat familiar Meterpreter payload. Set our host to our IP address. Try that one. This is the target. This is the remote host target for our PSExec command and forthcoming execution. Looks good. Set SMB user ADHD. Now we're going to define the username. We're calling it SMB user because we're going to authenticate, hopefully, against an SMB service on our Windows target. So we'll set the user. We'll set the password for that user. Like I said, I like to do show options and just make sure our host looks right. You can see the port that we're targeting, which is the SMB server message block service port on our target. These, you generally need to change these settings. You might in certain circumstances, but we'll leave those default. And then we're setting password, user. Sometimes you might need to set domain, etc., but we're not going to mess with that at this point since it's not relevant. We've set our payload appropriately. Our L host is set. Is that right? I think so. Let's just double check. Dot 220. Okay, looks good. And now we should do exploit. Dun, 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 dun. If you get to this point and you're impatient, Hitting enter sometimes makes me feel better. Let's see here. What have we done wrong? Let's go check something real quick. Off, right? Now I'm scared. Okay. Man, just turn the firewall off 17 times. It'll be fine. Do it again, do it again, do it again. You know, it's ironic. You know, we're frustrated that Microsoft keeps trying to turn on a firewall and AV and apply security updates while we're trying to figure out how to secure our environment. So it's a bit of a conundrum. But for the moment, I just wanted to do what I told it to do, right? Yeah. Okay. Just be obedient. So there you go. This works. It sincerely works. Again, default configuration for Windows, broadcast name resolution enabled. This is crazy. It's again, I think it's becoming more rare for this specific use case, but it remains a problem, and it's another one of those problems that, as you just saw, can be solved with a simple change, something like turn on the firewall, block 445. We can wait for this to time out, but we don't really need to. We don't get very far. You know, stage one effectively is, can I get to 445 on the target? And nope, we can't. Simple change, effectively free. I'm not minimizing the potential complexity of the testing and the centralized management, etc. But there you go. Okay. I like it. It's a cool tool. And again, I think it will have continued utility irrespective of the, hopefully the elimination, so to speak, of broadcast multicast name resolution. You know, we'll see what happens, but I feel positively about that. Okay. All right. Now, moving on to the next subject of the day. Let me find the appropriate slide. It's going to be all right. I lied to myself about slide numbers. I do. Host firewalls. Consider implementing them. Consider turning them on. Consider the value thereof. Be prepared to demonstrate the value proposition. Boom. Now, what about this internet thing? What about this internet thing? I've said for years, wouldn't it be nice if you could just deny internet access to all your users? And the answer is, oh boy, that'd be like heaven. Of course, we'd be out of jobs, so maybe that's a downside. But this is no surprise. You know, what is the attack vector of choice? You know, it's the interwebs. We talked a little bit about wireless security yesterday, and that does not mean wireless security has no importance or no value. But when was the last time that you had a nation-state threat actor sit in your parking lot? Not really a fair question, I suppose, but they probably don't have to for most enterprises. They can probably stay in the comfort of their basement and attack you over the internet. At least that is the path of least resistance for the vast majority of attacks that we experience in this wonderful modern age. So it's important we talk about this, potentially, maybe especially because of the idea of, let's see, can I use my pen? Initial access. These are monumental. This is significant, and I mentioned obviously a handful of common drive-by compromise, drive-by download malware categories, from SOC-Golish to Qbot to Bootloader, and if we can hamstring those things, a significant number of cases I've worked in recent memory, initial compromise came through this drive-by compromise or exploitation of a legitimate website. It is the user going in search of something and then being led astray, often by search engine optimization or search engine poisoning or whatever. And somehow, some way, these users find that they have a gift, they have a talent. They find this malicious payload, download it, execute it, and or it takes advantage of a web browser exploitation or misconfiguration or whatever, and then bad things happen. Real quick aside, I'm just going to show you. I think you could probably see this okay. So this is from don't go to these. Don't go to these URLs, please. These are actual evil. This is a drive-by download in action for a case. This is a parallel, at least drive-by compromise for a case that we worked not long ago. And what you're seeing is that this particular individual, the dynamism with which this occurs baffles me, and I want to understand it, to be frank. So I'm going to look for something. The last case that I worked, the individual user was looking for forms to simplify applying for colleges. Pretty legitimate, pretty reasonable, not nefarious in and of itself. And somehow, some way, they're redirected to a site just like this. In that case, the site that they went to was actually a legitimate site that sold wheel bearings. True story. Sold wheel bearings. And the user gets there, doesn't really pay attention to the fact that the URL involves wheel bearings. Seems pretty logical that the wheel bearing manufacturer ought to be providing paperwork on how to apply for college. You know, and you and I are going, oh my gosh, how did this happen? How could they not notice that? But point in fact, they were trying to solve a problem, a potentially significant problem to them applying to colleges. And they think they found the solution. They think they found the answer to their problem. And so they just go great guns. They're going to click, they're going to click, they're going to click, they're going to open, they're going to extract, they're going to ignore security warnings and pop-ups. And so in this case, this individual was looking for emancipation information for the state of Illinois. Again, go to this place called Skilled Grad. They should have used that one for the college entrance paperwork, don't you think? But they don't know, they don't care. Here is a direct download link. Yes, exactly what I've been looking for. I've spent 6.5 minutes searching the interwebs. I finally found it. I download it. You can see it redirects. Maybe you can't see, it's a little hard, sorry. Redirects to catering something.pl manual PHP. That makes sense. And then as part of the initial actually header redirect, you get to download this cool zip file. And then embedded in the zip file is this JavaScript. And yeah, you guessed it. They click the link, they download the zip file, they extract the zip file, they execute the JavaScript, and they're owned. Bad things happen next. This is an actual excerpt from the next stage of this attack. This is a PowerShell script that is instantiated shortly thereafter. And I have a point here. So hang with me. We're going to talk about some of the components of this. But this is fairly normal. This is fairly commonplace in what we're seeing in drive-by compromise, drive-by downloads. And so this is the PowerShell script that actually establishes command and control in this particular scenario. So what you see here is a bunch of domains, usually 10 when it comes to bootloader specifically. And I am just astonished by how many of these exist. Every time I see this, there are 10 completely distinct domains. The list changes even in a single compromise. Where do they come up with all of these? Square edge, field notes. Again, don't browse to these, please. But if you need to investigate these, I did want to show you this. This is fascinating, and this is germane. If you're not familiar with Browserling, I like it. I think it's cool. It is designed for web browser development. I might subvert its utilization just a tiny bit. I'm going to go to Browserling. This provides me a virtualized browser interface. It allows me to choose operating system, browser version, primarily for testing. But I like it because it gives me some basic interaction with the site. Be careful about how you do this. But it's not careful from a security perspective, careful from a content, safe for work, that kind of thing. So I'm going to visit makeupology.co.uk. That is a command and control, must be terrible, malicious domain. Am I right? Makeupology. Yes, I'm doing it off screen just to make sure that I don't get myself in trouble. And and browserling creates an isolated virtualized instance. And this, as it turns out, like all the rest of them, this is a legitimate website. This is a legitimate website that has been compromised. And so there's really, I mean, again, nothing nefarious about this site in particular. And point in fact, in just a minute, we'll see that this is categorized as a legitimate business site. And this is, again, really quick, high-level anatomy of a drive-by compromise. And we've got to figure out how to stop this. And part and parcel, yeah, we'd like to educate the user. That makes sense. And I don't want to diminish that process at all. We should continue to help educate the user. I'm a user. I learn all the time. I actually, true story, I shouldn't even admit this because now I'm embarrassed, but it's too late since I started talking about it. I have a Tennessee small business license. Every year I have to file a statement in taxes, an updated business performance for the state of Tennessee. It was actually due week before last, and I was in a bit of a panic because I'm super busy. I haven't had time to get it done, and there you go. I'm being emotional, and I get a beautifully crafted email message from the state of Tennessee saying, if you just click here, we can get your form filed. It'll be super easy. There'll be a minimal fee. And it looked pretty legit. And in my stupidity, I clicked the link. I went to the site. In fairness to me, it's actually a legitimate service. It wasn't the state of Tennessee. They had a valid cert. The URL matched. And I wasn't being completely an idiot, but I was panicked. I was behind the 8 ball, really, really hurried. I ended up submitting my forms. They were legitimately submitted. It just cost me $300 more than it should have. And I was horribly embarrassed and had to go tell my family and confess. And it happens. It can happen. So my point is, we can all use a little reminder. A couple $100, truthfully, was a fairly cheap lesson, although it hurt a little. My pride went. In any case, stop talking about me. We've kind of talked about this categorically. Never click the link. Yeah, I am 100% in agreement with that. Unfortunately, again, in my last scenario, even visiting the link manually, I still got hosed. But absolutely true. And this is something that I think we do need to continue to educate our user base on and say, you just got to be cautious. You've got to be cautious. Was this a solicited email message? For my specific example, the answer is no, it was not a solicited email message. Did it trigger an emotional response for me? I'm sad to say it did. It was directly applicable to me, and it was something I was stressed out about and worried about, and so I fell prey to that particular social engineering attempt. But yeah. Oh well. Deny listing. Deny listing. We talked about this. Let's look at all of the gazillion, that's a technical term, gazillion websites on the internet today, all the additional gazillion that'll be on the website or on the internet tomorrow. And let's find all the bad ones and not let our users go to the bad ones. Seriously, and I have not spent a lot of time and energy looking at it, but I'm fascinated by how there's got to be a dynamic component to how that bootloader document was created and presented to the user. I don't exactly know what it is, but it's just too coincidental. And in some way, the users get there. I don't know how it happens, but they find it. They're talented at it. No harm, no criticism of them. But you go on the internet and there's a lot of junk there. Am I right? I mean, for crying out loud, how many websites actually provide tangible, legitimate value out of all of the gazillion that we have to choose from? So deny listing is just, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. And the users, we talk about don't click the link. And then ironically, in many instances, I see enterprise staff, their job is to click the link. And I kid you not, and I think that's important perspective. If you are in accounts payable or accounts receivable or HR, you are clicking links and or opening attachments in email all day, every day. And probably you're doing it at a high rate of speed because you're getting hundreds of resumes or you're getting hundreds of invoices or maybe even thousands of invoices. And their job is to interact with these things. And, we come alongside them and say, of those 973, why did you click the 974th one? That's not fair. That's not reasonable. And similarly with the interwebs, some logic can be in play. We can definitely educate the end user, but ultimately you go and browse the internet and there's just a lot of garbage, from ads to drive-bys to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think in my specific example, in the slides that I just shared, from the specific actual bootloader example, I don't suspect that the threat actors did this. I suspect that they compromised, obviously, legitimate sites all around the world, and there were a bunch of them that seem pretty normal, pretty legit. They're mostly like small business front, small domain kind of things, like the Makeupology site, for example. But the part of the point in presenting that is that that we have this thing called site categorization, and we can take advantage of sort of the feature function of how domain names are registered, how they are then categorized by the technology tools of the world. And as pen testers, at the very least, as security testers, really cool way to potentially circumvent the sort of the denialist approach, or even the filtered categorical approach, is to go find a domain name that was legitimate yesterday but is no longer active or current. Expired domains is one. Let's look real quickly. I have too many browser windows, just like you. Talk about users going everywhere. That's me. So this is a way that we see, well, pen testers regularly. Again, I'm not sure that I see threat actors doing this. They have slightly different rules, right? It's totally okay for them to compromise beauty or Makeupology. It's not generally in the rules of engagement for a pen tester. So we can go somewhere like an expireddomains.com and then look for domains, you guessed it, that expired recently, but were recently legitimate. And so they might have legitimate business categories associated with them. They might be at least accurately identified yesterday as a business site or a shopping site, or etc. And so if I come in here and I go to, I'm curious, I don't actually know what this will do, makeupology.co.uk. This is a FortiGuard site. I just picked this at random from our pals at Fortinet, and basically it's going to tell us if your users were going to visit this site, and let's say you had Fortinet filtering in place and you allowed them to go, say, to shopping or business sites, could they go to this site? I seriously don't know what the category will be, so let's find out. General interest, personal, interesting. Let's see, there was... now I got to go look at that slide real quick. I'm going to try one more just for the sake of argument. What choices do we have? Let's do something that's easy to type. Treatthem.uk. Let's do treatthem.uk. General interest business. So if we go, let's just stop all the evil sites. Stop everything that ends in evil.com or malware.com or illegitimate.com or wares.com. You get the idea. Then we feel good about ourselves, block all the evil things. We allow all the good things. Allow the good things, like business classified sites. And ultimately, again, for this specific example, that just fails. That fails. So some cool links here if you want to learn some more. Expireddomains.com is interesting to look at. If you're a pen tester, it's a gold mine, and finding domains that have recently been expired and then have been categorized as something legitimate can be really, really useful in hiding your evil intentions, if you will. Of course, from a pen test perspective, you have permission, et cetera, et cetera. But this is so cool, so useful that we actually have a tool. BHIS has created a tool called Domain Gain that will help us to sleuth out recently expired domains that we could then take over. This is fascinating. I forgot to show this on the last slide. this is super cool. So this is expireddomains.com. You can filter, you can sort, you can look for different extensions. Generally speaking, you're looking for something that's relevant or germane to the organization that you're testing. So some of these might be immediately more useful than others. I love the price. I don't know. I assume this is dollars. I hadn't really tried to buy anything. And I think if you look at this, you definitely want this one. Looks totally legit, don't you think? I mean, I'd pay $106,000 for that. To make that process easier, there's this tool called domaingain.py, and it will basically help you to find and or enumerate domains that make sense for utilization in your environment. And this particular screenshot, it's coming up with 500 or so. And then we have the option here again to decide who are we working with or who are we testing with. And that's pretty fascinating. I don't know what a lot of these are. Bloodsaveslives.org. You know, maybe that's germane. If you're doing a healthcare clinic, then you could do something, you could do a phishing email related to a blood drive or something like that. Or this is a pretty good one. This one looks, you know, really legit. Obviously, at some point it was legit, but what are the chances that the organization you're working with allows users to visit government or legal sites? You know, that's a gold mine, especially if you happen to be working in the Pacific Northwest, just for example. So pretty cool, pretty fascinating and interesting approach. One more time, I don't feel like the threat actors do this particularly. They are, you know, effectively leveraging this functionality, but they just go abuse a legitimate site, and they might just find a WordPress flaw in OregonCityParks.org and then use it for command and control. So it's the same overarching idea, probably a slightly varied approach. So I know that this is not a hard sell. Internet filtering, you know, internet allow listing is important, and I don't suspect anyone that's joined us here today is like, nah, let the users browse wherever they want. So let's talk a little bit about how we might sort of approach this and accomplish this in a reasonable way. Back to the art of the possible, the attainable, the next best. What can we actually do? Because having this conversation with a typical enterprise can be a bit challenging. We need to limit where our users can visit on the internet. Okay, well, that's fine. How many legitimate sites do your users go to? How many? 10, 50, 100, 5,000? Legit. Somebody talk to me in the chat, in the Discord. What do you think? What's a reasonable number? Depends on the industry. Fair enough. Couple, 10, 5. DJ and I are like on the same page. 0. They don't need to go anywhere. 20. So far, no one has said 2,000. So far, no one has said 1,000. You know, push comes to shove, how many sites do you visit on a regular basis? How many sites are in your favorites? And I guess the overarching point is not a ton. I mean, if I literally had to come up with a list of sites I visit, I'll bet I could probably come up with 20, maybe 30. I'd have to work at it a little bit because I go to the same places on a regular basis. Now, is that extensible? Does that work for 5,000 users, 10,000 users, 20,000 users? I think the answer is probably, to a certain extent, yes, especially depending on the business vertical. Somebody said depends on the industry, and I think that's wise. If you're working in a healthcare environment or a manufacturing environment or a financial services environment, I'll bet that list is pretty dang finite. I'll bet it's pretty finite. Coming up with that list, now, interestingly, coming up with that list could be hard, right? That could be challenging. I have participated in trying to come up with that list in enterprises in the past. And that can be really challenging. One of my favorite stories, working in a healthcare environment, we got the brilliant idea, and this seemed legitimately brilliant at the time, this was quite a while back, that we should probably block every domain that ended in .ru. Not to pick on .ru, but at the time, we thought there's no legitimate reason This was a United States-based healthcare organization. There's no legitimate reason that they need to be visiting any site that's .ru. And so in our infinite wisdom, we went through change control. We talked to IT. We got approval. We made this change on the external secure proxies. No more .ru for you. And we're like, hey, for the win. Look at how much we improved the security posture. And then, I don't know, it was a day or two later. I think it just took them that long to find me. It wasn't that it took that long for it to break things. But a day or two later, I got a very, very upset call from someone who's directly responsible for the children's services component of one of the clinical facilities. And as it turned out, part of the process of helping the children they were serving to feel more comfortable and more at ease, they went to this website that was coloringpages.ru. And there were these literally pages they could print so that the children could color a doggy or a kitty or a cow. And I broke it. And they were crushed. They're like, what are we going to do? How are we going to give coloring pages to these children? You know, there was nothing evil about that site. That was a lesson learned. Like you might be surprised. Defining that list is not easy. It's not easy. One thing that should be potentially easy is ad prevention. Ads are everywhere. Ads are junk. If you can do ad removal or ad blockers in your environment, then do it. Then do it. Tiny additional side note. And then this, I'm going to put on a different hat, if you will. I'm going to sort of switch from defender to incident responder. When really bad things happen, when you have let's say a ransomware outbreak, and it gets distributed to the vast majority of your systems through group policy, and it's been a really, really bad day, possibly a really bad series of days. And then you call someone like me and you say, how do we stop the bleeding? If you remember way back on day 1 and or 2, when I talked about egress and auth, one of the first things I'm going to say is unplug the freaking internet right now. Kill the threat actor's ability to interact with your environment. That's surprisingly tenable in the midst of a ransomware outbreak, and the enterprise usually says, okay, and then they kill the internet. And then the next question is, somebody somewhere soon says, we need the internet to do business. Okay, that's fair. What sites do you need in order to do business? Let's categorize and rank those. And fascinatingly, in the midst of active incident response, the enterprise can come up with that list relatively easily and relatively quickly. They know right out of the gate that there are these top 5, top 10 sites. You vet those sites, you allow those in and out of the internet, out of the firewalls, and we move forward. And again, in the midst of crisis, we can actually pull this off, which makes me wonder. But I digress. Outside of crisis, we need a solution, so to speak. We need an approach. And I've been leading you to this point, of course, slowly but surely. And the idea that comes next is, if we're going to do internet allow listing, the chances are that we have a fairly limited number of legitimate business sites. And actually quantifying and categorizing those is not easy. It's not trivial. You might be able to do it, but it's probably too dynamic to even manage on an ongoing basis. So what about categorical filtering? What about categorical filtering? Now, I've shown you that this is not, again, a silver bullet. This is not going to work 100% of the time. You might still allow your users to go to makeupology.co.uk, which is unfortunately a compromised site, but this is a huge stride in the right direction. Huge stride in the right direction. You're probably already doing some categorical filtering, if I had to guess. Do you let your users go to adult sites, just for example, or online gambling sites? And usually the answer is no. And so once again, the potential easy button here for internet allow listing is to start at the categorical level. And look at this list. This is a pretty full-featured list. There aren't a lot of gaps in this list, and decide where should users be allowed to go. Review business components, business function, etc. And think about the ways that we could limit our exposure. Let's see. Should they be able to go to spam sites? Should they be able to go to social networking? No, just kidding. Probably can't pull that one off. If you could, more power to you. How about violence? How about weapons? And now, frankly, in some situations, circumstances, some business environments, those may be legitimate. How about, nah, this is important. There's so many new sites coming on the interwebs all day, every day. We know this. We've talked about it. We talked about a gazillion, a couple gazillion, many gazillion, a gazillion, it feels like sometimes. And then the folks like Fortinet, we just looked at their categorization portal. They've got a daunting task before them. And I don't care what firewall solution or secure proxy you use, they're probably making a tremendous effort to block sites categorically on an ongoing basis. Again, not perfect, but uncategorized is sort of the it's the black hole. It is the nobody has seen this site. Nobody has confirmed the nature of this site, so we don't know what bucket it fits in. And often these sites are brand new, and brand new is often perilous. So if you can pull it off, you should seriously consider disallowing access to uncategorized sites. And obviously these are pretty overarching. If you do that, and this, and depending on your organization, maybe you do these things, probably, this is useful. We make huge strides, again, limiting our exposure, minimizing our attack surface. Not perfect. Can we get around it? Yes. Can bootloader potentially get around it? Yes. But hugely, hugely beneficial and pretty easy to accomplish for the most part. One other cool thing, way back when I was young, and I blocked coloringpages.ru, we didn't have quite the proliferation of a computer in your hand, the mobile phone. Heaven forbid you disrupt the normal shopping activities of your user populace. It's just not quite as much of a crisis as it was in years gone by, because they can probably do it on their phone. And truthfully, that can be a tenable workaround. That's something that you can actually, explain to your user staff, make part of your acceptable use policy. We have a guest Wi-Fi. You're allowed to use your personal mobile device on the guest Wi-Fi. If you want to go shopping, if you want to go to something.ru, we found out in that exact same situation and scenario that we had a significant Russian population working at the healthcare facility. I don't know why I didn't think of that, to be frank. And a lot of them were going to mail something.ru. They were legitimately checking webmail and communicating with relatives back home. And how foolish of me to think that I could come up with a 2-letter designation to isolate all evil things. But in that instance, we were able to say coloring pages okay, webmail, you're allowed to do that on your personal mobile device attached to the non-corporate Wi-Fi or what have you, and it's workable. It's workable. Yeah. So Fred asks a great question, and that is, how did this categorization occur? And that's a fantastic question, and it depends on generally speaking, the vendor solution that you're using. So this is actually, I'm not sure what this is from. I don't think I have it documented here. This would literally be something that you configure at your firewall or at your proxy in your environment. And so your vendor would have some sort of an approach. And I've worked most frequently of late with like a Zscaler, which is a hosted proxy solution. And so they populate their categories. They provide a way for you as a security practitioner to then go check the categories, like I did with the Fortinet web portal a minute ago. And they often, let's see, I bet it does. Let's take a quick look. So in this instance, if I'm using Fortinet firewalls, if I'm using FortiGate on my perimeter and or some sort of proxy through Fortinet, then they would be responsible effectively for managing the categorization of many sites. And it's fascinating here. You can actually specify what version of FortiOS are you using, because if you're using an older version, you might not get this result. This is constantly changing, constantly updated. You can even see the database version here, which is pretty cool of them. And if you don't like this, and this happens fairly frequently, if you actually are doing, I've had this happen. I had a legitimate web server, a web webmail server be categorized as a firearms and violence and bomb site or some such in fairly recent memory. And so we've filtered that because healthcare environment, I believe you don't need to be going to sites about weapons and violence as part of your day job. So we killed that, and then they were unable to get to a legitimate site that was miscategorized. And so usually you have the opportunity to say, I think you need to update your idea of this. And of course, you can do so conversely. We now know that we don't want our users going here. So once again, you could request a review and say, this looks evil. Again, great question. It depends a lot on the solutions that you're deploying, and it can be a bit challenging. Definitely an iterative process. Allow listing approaches. Then we'll sort of tie up this conversation. Allow list every site. Well, I suppose super high security environment. I have seen environments, manufacturing as a specific example, where for the most part, the staff, the line staff, the manufacturing staff, they used computers for very limited purpose and very limited resource. One was, webmail, corporate webmail, and the other was to get to the payroll portal, to their ADP or whatever it was. And maybe in that case, we could say legit, they really only need to go to 4 places. I seriously almost went 4 places. It's been a long week. Am I right? So maybe you could just categorize those 4 sites. It might work in some situations, but usually that's really challenging. In an emergency, incident responder, incident response plan, I don't think it's a terrible idea to categorize your most critical business internet sites. Not a terrible idea to have at least a list of, if we were in an emergency tomorrow and we needed to dramatically limit internet connectivity, could we do that? And if we did, we need to allow these 10 sites. Interestingly, total side note, just a little tidbit, when it comes to application and/or web access prioritization in the midst of active incident response, one of the things we almost always ask, we kill the internet, we rotate privileged credentials, we put out the fire, stop the bleeding. The next phase is, how do we begin to get back to business as usual? How do we fix this problem? And so we say to the business, what's your highest priority for systems to get back online? And almost invariably, at the top of the list, if not number 1, number 2 or number 3 is anybody? It's payroll. It's payroll. That's almost always at the very top. Yeah, there you go. Courtney, excellent. Exactly. Ironically, they don't really think that way until they realize that all their staff's not going to get paid. And so once again, it's worthwhile if you have an external payment portal, document that stuff, include it in your incident response plan. Could be pretty significantly valuable when we have time to have that conversation. So allow list every site, probably not going to work. Maybe come up with a list of sites that are at the top of the list, business priorities, not a terrible idea. Allow a list categorically. Maybe you can even do custom categories in your secure proxy solution and create this business critical application category and populate that in advance. What a fantastically cool notion. Let the users choose to go to sites. This is the idea that in some situations and circumstances, some technologies, the user can actually be prompted with are you sure you want to go here? This site is categorized as blah. Do you want to proceed? And maybe not ideal, kind of makes us cringe just a little bit, but in many instances, just that little pause. I'm reasonably certain that if we could have stopped me in my tracks, using myself as an example, and you had told me that the site that I was visiting, I thought it was the Tennessee SOS government, and instead you'd give me a little pop-up that says, you sure you want to go here? We haven't seen this site before, and it's categorized as shopping. I would have gone, maybe I wouldn't have, but let's just assume I would have. So it's a possibility. It's something that you could consider. I effectively attempted to demonstrate this through the bootloader component, just to say, there is no silver bullet. We see compromised or compromised content delivery. I mean, for crying out loud. And we'll see this in a little bit when we get into the web testing section. But if you've ever tried to run some sort of non-transparent proxy, and basically just what I mean by that is let's say you go to CNN or MSN or yahoo.com or you name it, and you pull it up in your browser while watching all of the traffic that's coming to and from that browser. You're like, I went to one site, and then dozens of other sites are flying by in the background. You don't see it through your browser, but it's content delivery networks, it's ad delivery networks, it's analytical services. It's nuts, absolutely nuts. When you just go to a discrete website, how many other sites you're actually interacting with, and what are the chances that one of those has been compromised? Yeah. Don't give up, don't lose hope, don't despair. But once again, art of the possible. If we could, let's just say we went through the effort of categorical allow listing and we reduce our attack surface by 10%, 15%, totally doable. Totally doable. DNS is kind of important. We're going to talk about it a little bit today. It is kind of important. It is. It used to be not long ago. Okay, wait a minute. It was long ago, maybe. I don't know. Back when I was doing systems engineering, network engineering, the standing joke was anytime anything went wrong in the enterprise, you blamed it on the network. It's got to be the network. And mostly that's because we couldn't really see into the network. We really didn't know what was happening. So it was just easier to blame. It's the network. Now we've transitioned to whatever is happening in your environment. It's probably DNS. Probably DNS. DNS is just fundamental and critical to the way our networks work. Name resolution as opposed to typing in IP addresses to attach to the file share or to visit the website. We use name resolution for just all sorts of network service and network communication. So secure DNS is becoming more and more frequent and definitely utilitarian. And it's back to the idea that potentially we can limit access to websites categorized based on their name and or the associated categorical website. So this is OpenDNS. Part of Cisco umbrella now, one of many choices, and it's just illustrating that you have the potential to do sort of the same thing that we looked at from a firewall or proxy perspective through name resolution and name resolution categorization. This is potentially much more accessible to a smaller business or even a home or something along those lines that would allow us potentially to filter out name server response and or access. If you can't find the name, then you don't get to go there. Just a potential tool in your arsenal. While I talk through this, I wonder, Ryan, Yuri, could we prep to just do a quick 10-minute break? We don't have a lot of labs today, and we've got a fair amount of talking and content to deliver. So if maybe we could come up with a 10-minute timer here in just a minute after this slide, that would be pretty cool. I'm sorry, that's ad hoc of me, but a bio break might be in order. Coffee is probably required. DNS over HTTPS. This is newish. And it is incorporated in more and more browsers. And it's one of those things that it's a bit of a conundrum because encryption is great, right? We love encryption. Encryption makes things more secure. Generally, holistically, I suppose it's not a terrible idea, a terrible notion. At the same time, encryption denies us visibility, which is a trade-off. A lot of times we're in the wild, we're arguing for this kind of thing as a privacy concern. And then in enterprise, that's probably not nearly as significant in terms of acceptable use policy and et cetera. When John talks about this, he kind of socks it to the browser developers. And it feels like an element of control. It is not about securing your DNS requests. It is literally about the browser and the browser vendors collecting metadata, collecting data about you. The data about you, as you well know, is worth a lot of money. And it's really not an effort to make our lives better. It's an effort to control how we interact with the internet and then to potentially plumb the depths of data. Again, imagine, if you will, the discrete visibility. I, as a vendor, have direct visibility and effectively own all of the name queries that you do as an individual. What might I learn about you? That could be pretty significant, pretty significant. So this is just an interesting conundrum and something that remains a question for how the enterprise is going to deal with it. Okay. So before we jump into vulnerability management, let's take a break. Again, there's a pretty good chunk of discussion today and sort of sparse lab. So get up, move around, grab a cup of coffee. We'll throw 10 minutes on the slide just to give you a breather. 4 days in is challenging. So caffeine, calisthenics, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you. coolest timer ever. That was a psychological game to see if you were paying attention to the timer. Thank you. Thank you for that flexibility. Yeah, just again, wanted to give a quick break and thank you for coming up with that so quickly. Yeah, so we got another pretty decent chunk of content to cover, and then we will get into a lab. We're going to talk about vulnerability management, generally speaking, and then we're going to sort of gently transition from an application, web application perspective, and then we'll give you a couple different lab opportunities to experiment with both of those things. And vulnerability management is, boy, it's just not in general a very sexy topic. It's a tough one, and it's been around a long time. And again, it sort of falls into that sort of due diligence bucket. And I think we've made pretty huge strides, honestly, in the last 10 years. And it wasn't that long ago that we didn't patch regularly at all, and then we transitioned to just doing security and critical updates, and we've come a long way. And as much as I complain about my Windows system updating and breaking things, it's part and parcel of the world that we live in, and I'd rather have the dynamism of patching and have to struggle through now and again, because point in fact, yeah, I complain about it, but having been involved in IT administration and systems engineering for many years, the vast majority of Windows patches usually work, and they usually don't break stuff. Now, I'm not saying never, and I'm not totally recanting on my complaining from yesterday and the day before, but the bottom line is that it's that component has gotten a lot better. On the flip side, it feels like Qualys and Nessus and Rapid7 are pretty much the same solutions they were 10 years ago. And if you work for one of those companies, please don't be offended by that. I just think, again, there's not a lot of dynamism left. It's, inventory your environment, catalog the patches that need to be distributed, and then what? Nice management interface, nice reporting, but ultimately it comes down to those core features and functions, and it still remains a challenge, especially from a 100% coverage perspective. My submarine analogy from yesterday came from an overarching presentation that I did on unmanaged systems, and it was really to sort of highlight that it's fine and well that you have this vulnerability management platform and vulnerability management solution program. And what about all the things that fall outside of that, especially when it comes to IoT and biomed and et cetera, et cetera. So this remains a challenge. I still remember about 127 years ago when we first fired up Nessus in a corporate environment, large corporate environment, as I recall, somewhere around 25, 30,000 nodes. Took a while, of course, to get approval to even run this crazy new thing called a vulnerability management scanner. We ran Nessus. Everybody was afraid it was going to knock everything over. And we made it through. All the business critical systems survived. And the gentleman who was in charge of security at that point, he printed up the report. He printed up the Nessus report. And I kid you not, it was about yay thick. I swear it was more than a full ream of paper. And I think he thought he was making a point. He made a point, all right. He took that report and he dropped it on the manager responsible for servers in the environment. And it probably won't surprise you to know that we weren't allowed to run a Nessus scan again for I think it was almost 2 years. That's not helpful. That's not cool. It didn't make any positive impact. It just made the server manager mad, frustrated, overwhelmed. Bad plan. Bad plan. It literally took months and months and months to overcome that poor interaction. But we still kind of approach it that way in some enterprises. Same as it was 10 years ago. Vendors have not changed with the times. Test and scan for external vulnerabilities. Moving towards credential scans. not a lot of actual innovation. Again, I'm certain that the vendors and even maybe some of you, if you're responsible for some of these platforms, might say, no, that's not entirely fair. But it is the overarching solution and the overarching approach to the problem. And a lot of times, and this is kind of reasonable, and again, it's reactionary. Maybe it's a little bit emotionally led. I remember yet again when MS17010 was big news. This is the SMB vulnerability in Microsoft SMB version 1 that gave rise to WannaCry, and it was a brave new day in InfoSec when we realized that you could use this vulnerability, you could abuse this vulnerability, unauthenticated remote code execution, distribution of ransomware. And so what we did in that moment is we freaked out and we used a Nessus or a Qualys or some other tool, and we looked frantically for any and every system that wasn't patched for MS17010. Maybe we had a fledgling vulnerability management platform. Maybe we didn't have one at all, but all of a sudden we were going to deploy this tool or this patch, and we were going to do it like by end of business day today or end of week this week. And it was this, oh my gosh, association of recognized, legitimate, significant threat vulnerability with a patch. And that's kind of how we often relate to vulnerability management. Now, that was a bit of a unique situation, a bit of a unique scenario, required sort of an extreme response, but we kind of carried that over into how we relate to vulnerability management in general, and it's a mistake. It's a mistake. Now, granted, if there's a new MS17010, we might return to that, but in terms of an overarching approach to vulnerability management, identification of issues, identification of missing patches, identification of misconfigurations, that is just not a reasonable approach. We can't do it. And so what we end up with is this mountain of information about our environment, and then we're trying desperately often to find that MS17010, that one thing that's so important, we got to patch that right away, that critical vulnerability. And then we miss the highs, the mediums, the lows, the informationals, and we don't move significantly in our forward progress. So how does this work? How do we prioritize things? And this is a critical question. This is a critical question. And I suppose I don't use that word facetiously. Critical, high, medium, low, informational. That's often what we try to do. And it won't shock you to know that we think there might be a tiny bit of a better way. Addressing the most critical issues first, that makes sense. Again, MS17010, but if we just get laser focused on that and nothing else, then we have problems. We will encounter blind spots. We will miss things that are important. They just weren't labeled critical, for example. What we see in terms of threat actors and pen testers is that often, I don't know why this is, and maybe you don't experience this. I'd be fascinated to know. I feel like in a lot of ways, medium is the new critical. Medium, in some ways, the medium alerts, the medium severity prioritization items often lately, for me at least, seem the most heinous, the most vulnerable. I don't get it. A lot of times the criticals just don't seem that significant and or might be erroneous, but the mediums I'm finding I really need to pay attention to. Again, that may just be me and some of the tools and some of the solutions and what I do for a living, but we can't ignore the mediums. Trust me on this one. We cannot ignore the mediums. We can't say we covered critical and high, we feel good about ourselves, let's go golfing. So we need to think about how we might do this. And just for a super simple example, this is a low and or informational alert. This is an actual output from a scan. And this is just an example of a blind spot. You're staring at these three things. Which do you care most about? Yeah. Courtney again for the win. She's on a roll. Yeah. These, in general, you're like, oh, I got an alert that a network service is revealing its banner, its service banner. So a telnet or an SSH or a web server or whatever. Oh, boy, who cares, right? Who cares? Low, informational, no big deal. Unless and until you get to the bottom entry. And so this one is prompting you for a credential, and this one is prompting you for a credential, and maybe not ideal for telnet to be prompting you for a credential, maybe not for telnet to be alive and kicking at all, but be that as it may, this one is not prompting you for a credential. Whoops. That's important. That is no longer like, that's fine. Is it the end of the world? Is it an admin level portal prompt? Again, I don't know, but this is just illustrative. Do you care about that one? Yeah, I want to know about that one. And if I'm ignoring low informational medium, then I'm probably going to miss things that I legitimately care about. Again, this is just a singular example. This is a rhetorical question. Yeah, DJ, kill all telnet. Yeah, DJ, Courtney, and I were on the same page today for sure. Kill all telnet. Telnet allows for plain text authentication over the wire. That's why we don't really like it, among other things. But probably no legitimate reason in today's modern environment for that to be open and available. Easy for me to say, since I'm not the sysadmin or network engineer. But in any case, how many of your organizations address low and informational issues? In my experience, these are mostly ignored. Unfortunately, informational issues sounds like it's not even a concern. I just needed to let you know that there's this thing. It's not like warning, 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 danger, danger, danger. It's just, hey, for your information, FYI, thanks a whole bunch. FYI, you can get to the router without actually authenticating, but don't worry about it. It's a concern, mostly ignored in the enterprise. Based on that, again, we see the enterprise typically potentially responding to the output of their vulnerability management solution in the wrong way, or at least not the most efficient way, or at least not the way that we would recommend that you at least give it a try. Yeah, DJ again, alert fatigue. Alert fatigue is real, right? And don't get me wrong. You have limited resources. You do. You have to prioritize. And we did start this conversation by saying prioritization is important. So we need to get to the point where we do the best we can with the resources at hand. And once again, it won't shock you to know, much like we approach the MITRE framework, we're thinking, wait a minute, what if you could do this one thing? What if you could implement this one critical control and it would cover 5 areas of the attack matrix? What if you could do this one simple change and solve 6 problems from your security posture perspective? We're basically advocating that same approach from a vulnerability management perspective. Is what if you could make this one configuration change, or apply this one patch, or change this one process, and instead of fixing just that one critical or that handful of criticals, what if you could make a change and impact 500 systems? Solve a problem with high degree of efficiency and effectiveness. That's what we're hoping for. Managing organization, managing vulnerabilities by IP address. I think maybe in some ways, the major downside of that one is failing to do root cause analysis. Why? Wait. If we have an issue on a multiplicity of IPs, why? What's happening? And is there a possibility that we can approach this differently? That's the approach in my initial story about the 742-page report. It was a list by IP address. Then below IP address was criticality of vulnerabilities. And then that server storage admin was left to figure out, how do I approach this problem? How do I prioritize? And if you're legitimately talking about 5,000, 10,000, sometimes 30, 40, 50,000 endpoints, guess what? Very little potentially gets done. So what's the right way? What's the better way? And right, right is a scary word, because it implies full knowledge and visibility. And I don't know for certainty that this is right, in absolutely every situation and circumstance, but it's worth considering the idea of grouping issues by vulnerability, not by IP address. The idea, again, of painting broad strokes, that if we can identify a vulnerability or a category of vulnerabilities, then potentially with less effort or minimal effort, we could address the underlying cause, the root cause of that particular grouping of issues, and solve a significant problem instead of staring at a list of 25,000 IP addresses and associating by criticality. We're looking for a return on investment. That's a theme this week. We're looking for bang for the buck. Are the possible? Stop focusing on IP addresses and ranges. Focus on the vulnerability themselves, the categorical vulnerability, the grouping of the vulnerability. And experientially, and I mean that, based on vast experience from all of the fine folk that have gone into investigating and producing this course content, based on that experience, we're here to tell you that you could take a significant number in our example of 25,000 potential total vulnerabilities, group them categorically, and often reduce that to a couple hundred. And then that becomes accessible. It's not so ridiculously daunting. And then if you've reduced that to a reasonable, manageable number, you could potentially go back and layer on some of the historical perspective on criticality, on IP address ranges or segments of your environment, but starting at the grouping of the vulnerability. And then potentially you can use some sort of an automated solution, ultimately super helpful. Maybe you're leveraging, an SCCM again, or a PDQ, or if nothing else, a group policy. And if you can use some tooling to say, okay, wait a minute, we have TLS 1.1 enabled on all of our Windows IIS servers. And I'm telling you that your vulnerability management solution is going to be mad at you. It's going to be upset about that. Should be disabled, should be deprecated. And so instead of potentially attacking a list of 1,232 IIS server IP addresses, you could potentially say, timeout, wholesale, we need TLS 1.1 disabled. Could we push that, test that, push that policy through group policy object, and then check that box? That's the idea. And there are obviously dozens and dozens of potential examples, but that's the idea. Find an issue, see if you can look into root cause analysis. What is the underlying problem? Potentially solve that problem through automation and actually make some progress. Actually make some progress. We've done this. We're not just spouting. This is not just theoretical. This is for real. We've seen this work. We've made this work. And by addressing groupings categorically through automation, seen huge, huge improvements in enterprises in weeks instead of months, years, et cetera, et cetera. This is of critical importance. And maybe this is an important brief philosophical statement. So here we are back at the MITRE attack matrix, and we've talked about how here we're outlining basically the kill chain, and not every attack follows this exact process, but it is an overarching workflow, an outline that applies to many attacks. And, when I talk about incident response, in some ways I say, anywhere that we can stop this process, anywhere along the way, I feel like it's a victory. Yeah, we won. Yay, good for us. Well, point in fact, as an incident responder, this already happened, or you wouldn't have called me. So I have a bit of a different perspective when it comes to putting out the fire. The fire is already burning. For an enterprise defense perspective, I really, 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 really want to prevent these two. I really, really want to make these never happen. And, never is a big word. But if we can stop initial access, then happy day. We don't have to worry about exfiltration. We don't have to worry about command and control. You get the idea. So although vulnerability management doesn't cut a huge swath out of this attack matrix, it does do something significant in improving the resilience to that initial access piece. And exploit public-facing applications, we're talking about things that are attached to the internet, accessible from the outside world. You just can't let those go. There is just zero tolerance for error. And external remote services, same thing. We're talking about VPN access, client access, Citrix, et cetera. We've got to nail these. So if you're looking for prioritization, overarching prioritization and vulnerability management, no doubt that's the spot. That's the spot. Application development. Who uses apps? Who uses web apps? Yeah, me too. This becomes a really interesting conversation, and it may or may not dovetail directly into vulnerability management conversation. Somebody's listening to me, smiley faces and thumbs up. The application development. The vast majority of enterprises that I encounter have some sort of internal development team, and they're using some sort of customized applications, and it just becomes part and parcel. Some organizations resist this with all of their might because they recognize the challenge of managing this component. Internal web application development, custom application development inside an enterprise, for better or for worse, often focuses 90+% on solving a business use case, and maybe 10% or less on security, proper architecture. It's just a bit of a paradigm shift, a bit of a conundrum. And so approaching this is pretty interesting, pretty fascinating. And if you have internal devs, I have seen some fantastic challenging interactions and debates between dev and security. And over the years, it's interesting, and it requires some thought. How can we approach this discussion? How can we talk about securing our internal applications, especially applications that we are developing? Training those devs, the devs, in my experience, that once we get past any sort of animosity between InfoSec and the devs, it's a beautiful relationship. I love working with those folks because they're super smart, and they know things that I don't know. They understand things that I don't understand. As primarily a security consultant, an incident responder, I think, man, they're so smart. And so, coming together and that marriage is magical if you can pull it off. Taking those devs and then retraining them or training them from a security perspective can be really, really significant, very expensive. And in my experience, those devs already have way too much work to do. So saying, time out, we need you to take a couple weeks off to go do X, Y, and Z is often really challenging. Tooling can be expensive. Automated tooling, third-party resources can be very expensive. And even if you can get the buy-in, even if you can get the re-education and or the testing and tooling saying, okay, let's just change the way we do dev. Let's do DevOps differently. It's like huge deal. So we talk about the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, continuous builds, continuous improvement. From a security perspective, I've always just felt like, and honestly, from a consumer and or end user perspective, I've always felt like continuous build, continuous improvement just meant that it was never done. And the resultant output was I paid for something that's still buggy. It's not entirely fair. That's obviously not the underlying intent, but it is definitely this notion of it's never complete. And that's realistic. We go through this entire process, of course, of continuous build, continuous improvement. We have a business use case. We spend lots of time, energy, effort building to that use case. And then at the end, we're like, security, can you take a peek? And then heaven forbid you find a significant issue, an architectural issue, a systemic issue. And then at the end of the development lifecycle, you're like, we need to start over again. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Yeah, as per this illustration. Really costly, because if we do find that and we do get organizational buy-in, then it costs a ton of money to have to go back and fix it, to re-engineer, re-architect. Not good. Obviously, probably not going to happen, and or we might miss things, so it can be really dangerous, ill-advised. We know, of course, we would suggest security testing throughout security architecture, consideration, design throughout the process, and it is more economical in the long run. And this is, again, a bit of an educational challenge, a bit of an educational hurdle, and I think it's really important, if you didn't gather from my previous commentary, that we develop a rapport with the DevOps teams, with the developers, because these are some, again, very talented folk, some exceptionally capable individuals, and I want to be friends with them, and I want to come alongside and partner with them to see that, you know, security doesn't have to be horribly difficult. It doesn't have to be really, really hard. And this is often just that initial impediment to can't do it, hard, expensive. Stop it. Stop it. These are smart people. Focus on what matters. Focus on the art of the possible, on moving the needle, making some forward progress, coming alongside and helping to either instrument or educate or whatever is appropriate for your environment. It is easier to teach a web developer security than it is to teach a tester development. That's powerful. It's a powerful statement, and I think it's a truism. So that perspective is pretty significantly different. In many instances in organizations, the security people can't stand the developers, and the developers can't stand the security people, and it's just, we need to overcome that. And you know, the 80-20 rule, again, to me, is the more mathematically, statistically relevant notion of the art of the possible. What improvements can we make? We can probably make some minimal effort improvements that get us large portions of the way towards secure application development and deployment. Many of the tools that we're going to talk about are so easy, we should use them all the time. I mean, sincerely, remember, these are smart people. The DevOps folks are smart people. If we can come alongside and demonstrate that there are ways to do this testing methodically on an ongoing basis, and it's just not that hard and it's just not that expensive, huge win. Continuous development life cycle, continuous improvement cycle. How about continuous security cycle? We can build that into the process in theory. Test everything. Why not? And through the process, the fact is that in a lot of instances, and I've seen this specifically, I can think of a specific organization I worked with not long ago. We start engaging in this process, and the DevOps folks, they dig it. Like they really get excited about the security once they begin to understand what's happening, the tooling, the issues. And it, again, it's a marriage made in heaven, if you will. Crawl, walk, run. Crawl, walk, run. Start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with the things that are easy to fix, and then work your way towards the more difficult. Start with forward progress. Automated tools are pretty useful. Automated tools can do a pretty good job of testing things like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, etc. Take advantage of that and make forward progress. Is it perfect? Nope. Will automated tooling and testing solve all of your problems? Nope. But what if you could implement these controls into your development cycle pretty easily, inexpensively, and get it done next month, next quarter? Overarching theme, obviously, of our discussion together this week. Silver bullet? Nah. Some things require manual testing. Proper expectations, forward progress, art of the possible. You're probably sick of hearing that phraseology, but that's okay. Some of these things are difficult. Stored cross-site scripting immediately comes to mind. A lot of these things will still require manual testing. And that's why it's important to have security testers. That's why it's important to have third-party relationships with wonderful companies like Black Hills Information Security, because there's utility beyond automated tools. But that's not an excuse not to fix the low-hanging fruit, not to implement continuous security in your DevOps lifecycle. Self-test before the test. It's funny. It's like we used to sort of decry this in days gone by when you do a pen test and you schedule the pen test, you do the rules of engagement call, and then you often would hear something from the internal resources of we can't start till 3 weeks from next Tuesday because we need to patch things. And we used to kind of go, well, that's silly. You shouldn't do that. That makes for an erroneous test. And I think maybe our motivations were wrong or off. And here again, we're saying, why not? There's no such thing as too much testing, and there's no such thing as addressing issues that shouldn't be addressed. I mean, why not? Why not? Continue to go through this process, look for high-value changes, much like we talked about generalized patch management. We're looking at things potentially sort of root cause libraries, insecure libraries that are in use, or misconfigurations on web application firewalls, or the kinds of things where you can go, oh my gosh, we could make a change on the WAF, web application firewall, that would disallow this particular attack vector or solve this particular problem, and it would fix it across all of our web server environment, as opposed to individual analysis of a web app or a web server or whatever. And like I mentioned, hopefully we're building rapport. We're educating DevOps. This is not us against them. This is coming together to make improvements. And if through that process, heaven forbid, they're probably going to get better at this, and they want to minimize effort, they want to minimize work, they want to maximize the security of their applications. Let's talk about some tools. Yeah, you pretty much can't talk about web apps in this wonderful modern age without talking about burp and zap. Yeah, Hammy says learning a bit of web dev and DevOps goes a long way, and I cannot agree more. That is, it's fundamental, it's foundational. You get the opportunity to come alongside and learn from those folks, and or explore that on your own. It's tremendously valuable. Can't really go wrong, I don't think. So we need some tools to do this, at least to accomplish the process that we've discussed so far. Burp is pretty darn cool. Burp is pretty darn cool. It is not free, but cheap and awesome. And there, of course, is a community edition, a free edition. It's performance limited. It's a bit hamstrung. The cool thing about Burp Pro is it's like $450 a year, I think. $449 a year. See, it's even cheaper than I thought. Burp Pro is $450-ish a year. There is an enterprise component depending on your environment, but $450 a year for a quality tool is just like chump change. It's chump change. Value for sure. Really cool. I see pretty much all the pen test firms of the world use it. I think you'll like it. You can experiment with it. PWYC has some other tools, lots of training options, some free training options. It's just you should check it out. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. W3AF free, Zap free, NIC2 free, and part and parcel. I just need to confess once again, I'm just being transparent with you today. I don't know how to stop. That happens when I'm tired and when I'm all out of liquid death. I'm not very good at web application testing. It's just not something that I ever really got into, and now I do IR for a living, and so when I have to play with one of these tools, it's like a new learning adventure. But they're cool and they're useful, and the truth is that I can pick them up, I can dust off my skill set, I can roll up my sleeves and get into Zap or Burp or NIC2 and find pretty quick value, even though I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. And I'm so grateful for the compendium of webcasts and training that Black Hills puts out. And again, PWYC is a tremendous use case. I'm a huge OWASP fan. I love what they do. Sometimes Zap makes me want to pull my hair out because it's sometimes feels cumbersome and slow. But the components of Zap, the functionality of Zap have improved so dramatically over the years. Again, just the idea of all that OWASP does is worth supporting, I think. Final bullet point is important. You can use these better or worse. We have some training on this. BB King internally has some fantastic web application free resource and training options. that goes a long way. Accelerated learning on these things can go a long way. If you just download Zap and think, okay, what do I do now? Or download Burp and think, what do I do now? You may find you lose interest in or don't gain full value out of those tools. So a little bit of know-how will sure help. Burp, easily the most heavily used tool by most web testers. Fact. It does not have a cool GUI. And it does have a GUI. It's just not cool. It's just not particularly lovely to look at. Who cares? Probably don't care, but just pointed fact. There's no place to insert a URL. You have to scan it. Worth every penny. Need to configure your browser, set your proxy settings, etc. A little bit of learning goes into this. If you've never done this before, it is not super intuitive. It's not super pretty. You don't exactly know what you're doing right out of the gate, but don't despair. Once you get a little exposure, and we're going to do a lab with Zap in here just a little bit, get a little exposure and go, dang, this is cool. The visibility that it gives you into what's happening with your browser. I mentioned non-transparent proxy just a bit ago. And this is exactly what I meant, is that effectively I'm using this tool to proxy my web traffic through the tool onto its destination and back again. So this gives me the opportunity to, as per this screen, to view and inspect the request and the response. So my web browser asks for a web page from google.com and google.com responds with content. My browser renders the content, and this tool lets me see all of that in great detail. And even more fun than that, it allows me to manipulate that content if I want to. So I can send the request from my browser to the proxy. I can stop it right there. I can mess with it and then send it onto the server, and I can wait for the response. I can stop it right there. I can mess with it, send it back to the browser. And this opens up all sorts of cool possibilities in terms of understanding, manipulating, and testing security components, interactions through Burp or Zap, if you will. If you've done any security testing at all, if you've done any pen testing at all, if you've done any web app testing at all, you're familiar with how important scope is. Absolutely ridiculously crucial. And scope means you've got permission, right? Permission to do what? Well, to test this web application. Well, then we need to make efforts, make sure that we understand how the tool works so that we limit our interactions to the scope of our permissions, the scope of our testing. So we can define that. We must define that in Burp, or we end up scanning things that are outside of scope. I mentioned a minute ago, if you open a web application, you open a typical web page, and this is a great place to start and then visualize the communications going back and forth between browser and yahoo.com. Does anybody use yahoo.com anymore? Is that a horrible example? How about Amazon? You may be astonished if you've never looked before at all the tangential sites that are accessed and referenced in content delivery again, and statistical analysis, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're not careful, you could use this tool inadvertently to end up places scanning, enumerating, interacting with things out of scope. So super important. This is one of those things that the training, some how-to informational, instructional kind of stuff will help you to avoid, jail. My mom uses Yahoo. No, I shouldn't laugh. That might not be a joke. Was it a joke? That's awesome. I love my mom. I'm not sure if my mom uses Yahoo or not. I'll have to ask her. It's not a joke. See, I was totally serious. I love Yahoo. That's awesome. What can you do with Burp? You can crawl. And by crawl, we mean basically you define scope, and then you can tell Burp to basically browse it automatically and enumerate all the links. It won't surprise you that if you're on Yahoo, if your mom's on Yahoo, there are a bunch of different things that she can click, right? And if we know anything about our user base, they're going to click them. And so Burp can do that for us automatically and enumerate the links. We can actually do active scanning. We can do automated attacks. There's so many things you can do through this platform. It's hard just to summarize it really quickly, but we can legitimately point it at a site in this particular question, a site that we've already enumerated. We've defined our scope. We've limited our scope to things we have permissions to interact with. We definitely want to do that before we engage in active scan. And then Burp can actually begin to analyze and attack input fields throughout this page. We're looking at testphp.vulnweb.com for this testing, for this example. And so it can actively scan, actively enumerate. We looked at enumeration and following of links on the previous crawl. Here we're actually going to say, oh, you see an input field, goof with it, fuzz it, send it data, search out components, brute force browse, etc., etc., etc. Pretty cool. And then as we initiate this process, we get to see the vulnerabilities. We get to see things that exist that maybe shouldn't exist, or at the very least require some additional analysis. Red, highlight, red on white are things you definitely want to check out. Those should be fairly legitimate, at least potential vulnerabilities in your testing environment within the scope of your execution, and require some investigation enumeration. These are the results that are pretty verbose, pretty easy to read, pretty self-explanatory. You're going to scan, you're going to see the summary, you're going to look at the results, and then, again, apply our overarching perspective that we just spent a lot of time talking about from a vulnerability management perspective. If you're responsible for securing this, judiciously look at root causes, ways that you might be able to solve these problems through automation or replacing a library or WAF changes and as you get comfortable with this, again, imagine partnering with the DevOps folks, the web app developer folks, and coming alongside and saying, look, you could do this. This is not rocket surgery. Here it is. In fact, it's a lot simpler than what you do all day, every day in your coding environment. Check it out. Inexpensive, relatively speaking. Speaking of inexpensive, how about free? Again, Zap provided by the fine folk at OWASP. One of many things. If you're unfamiliar with OWASP, shame on you. You should go check it out. Compendium of exceptional knowledge, lots of free resources, tremendous community. Probably there are OWASP meetings in your part of the world worth checking out. Again, in my humble opinion, pretty similar to Burp. One thing that I like about this is if you get a little experience with one transparent proxy versus another, Burp versus Zap specifically, you'll find there's some overlap, and so you get some familiarity. The interface is different, obviously, and there are some changes and differences in capabilities, differences in terminology, but a transparent proxy in a lot of ways has some similar underlying functionality, which is cool. This is growing and changing all the time. Like I said, it wasn't that many years ago when we would have been like, I'm sorry, we're going to use Zap for a lab. It's clunky, it's slow, and it doesn't do the things Burp does, but we can't give you a free license of Burp, and so here we go. I don't feel like I have to say that anymore. Basically does the same thing, allows us to intercept and modify response requests from browser, server, etc. Can do automated scanning, and the price is right. Price is right. Like I said, we'll have a lab opportunity here shortly. You're having to listen to me talk an awful lot today, and I appreciate that you're sticking with me. I know that it's a little more fun to get hands-on and play with this stuff, and we're setting up for that. Some of these, just to be totally frank, it's pretty difficult to do a lab on internet allow listing. It just is. Sorry. But again, we're moving towards a couple labs here shortly, so hang in there. You're awesome in every way imaginable. So getting caught. This slide and the next slide are basically about categorical test outcomes, and blocked or allowed in combination with, was it detected, yes or no? Won't surprise you. We've talked about it off and on over the last few days. Visibility, visibility, visibility. Obviously, I would like to prevent bad things from happening, but at the very least, I need to know they happened. And so do you. So that's important. And ultimately, much like our Blue Spawn lab from yesterday, we fire up Blue Spawn for EDR-like functionality, and then we do evil things and hope against hope, atomic red team, hope against hope, that we get caught, that it detects us. And that ultimately is what we're moving towards, to illustrate and or improve security posture, block, allow. In this example, again, it's just a spreadsheet used for web application pen test findings. Red equals blocked, green equals allowed, purple means bummer, blocked, but there was no alert. That's not good. We want, again, we need visibility, we need alerting, we need to know what's happening. Moving from can we be hacked to what can we detect? Back to this sort of assumed breach, assumed compromise. Back to the idea that it's just kind of acceptable, expected, that at some point you're going to have unauthorized access to your environment. Could be horrible, heinous, could be mistaken, could be insider threat, etc. It's going to happen. What is unacceptable is it happening in isolation and or invisible to you. We must see it. We need to detect it. Visibility is paramount. Visibility is paramount. And I usually categorize visibility versus containment. And visibility, obviously, being able to see all the things. Containment, ideally, active containment, stopping the bad things from happening. But ultimately, got to see it. Got to see it. We're working on this constantly. We're looking for new ways to help you. The community is new tooling. This is a work in progress. Start by finding gaps. Start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with the high-value objectives and targets. Fix them, move on. And maybe you need to start categorically, start with criticals, move to highs. We don't want to do that in isolation or in a vacuum, obviously, but you do need to prioritize. We're suggesting that, again, MITRE potentially is a framework, a taxonomy that would help you to a certain extent to manage and prioritize your efforts. Hey, you want to do a lab? I know you do. Okay. It's about time, right? That's what I thought. Okay, let's take a look. Zap. Always relish the opportunity when somebody asks what you do for a living. You can tell them you work with burp, zap. If you want to, you can throw in beef because it just makes for a nice conversation. I use burp, zap, and beep on a daily basis. But let's play with zap. And if you haven't done this before, I think you'll find it useful, utilitarian. If this is anywhere within your scope, your purview, you should check it out for sure. So we'll start once again. I should probably clean up after myself. Failure. Had all that time during break, all that strange timer time during break. Let's get out. Let's get out. Okay. Enter labs. Oh yeah, can I tell you a secret while we're here? There are lots of labs in here. You probably noticed that. These labs were designed to work on this VM. So moving forward, again, today, tomorrow, etc., you can play with some of these. Don't hesitate to move over to some of the alternate. If some of these make sense to you, sound applicable to you, we'll highlight one a little later in the day that ties in nicely to this conversation. There it is now. But don't hesitate to poke around. Don't feel like you're constrained to intro to security. That is not the intent at all. This is supposed to be your playground. And depending on how today's schedule goes, you may even have time in and around today's content to branch out and find something that looks interesting and pursue it further. Now, this is fairly dynamic, so it's possible you'll get somewhere and not know what you're doing. Of course, you can always back out. No harm, no foul. All right. So this lab is web testing. I know the slide says Zap, but just have to take my word for it. If you get into web testing, you'll see, yay, Zap, we're in the right place. Okay. One of my favorite things about web testing is all of the free resources for vulnerable applications, online things you can do. As soon as you get going down this path and you think, oh, I want to learn more, I want to try SQL injection, I want to try cross-site scripting, etc. Lots of cool things you can do. We're going to use the damn vulnerable web application server for this particular test. And as the name implies, it's designed to be flawed in some useful and meaningful ways so that we can test it, enumerate it, interact with it, and learn some stuff. So, Ubuntu. Wow. Ifconfig, our old friend, to enumerate the IP address of my system versus your system. Don't forget, this is unique to you. Your values are going to look different than this. Control L to clear the screen. I'm going to move to Intro Labs. I'm going to launch PWYC. Oops. I forgot my 3. What did I do wrong? Directory Intro Labs. You know, I do that every time. That is just the way my brain works. I cannot type DSVW to save my life. It always comes out DVSW, my brain. And especially when people are watching. Were you watching? DS. That's why I should do tab completion like I keep telling you you should do. Okay, so basically what we've done is just fired up a basic Python web server running within our Linux instance, our WSL. And it dutifully lets us know that is listening on 0000. All that means is it's listening on all available interfaces from WSL. So you can ignore the 000, so to speak. And then the port number is a high number, ephemeral port 65412. That should remain static. That should be the same number for you. This, of course, you're not going to access 0000. You're going to access your IP address at this port number. Then you're going to launch Zap. There should be a desktop icon in the middle of your Windows VM. You're going to go don't persist. You're going to do an automated scan. You're going to change this. Remember, you're going to put in your IP address, the one we just learned from ifconfig moments ago. You're going to go through the automated scan process. Traditional spider, TAC. We'll see the output. We'll see what we can see. Then we're going to go on to standby. Yeah, okay. Then we're going to fire up a Docker container. This is basically just like a virtualized application running in your Windows environment. So we'll follow along, fire up DVWA in Docker. We'll enumerate the IP address on our Windows system. This is where we just fired up the Docker container as opposed to the WSL system. And then we're going to open up Chrome. We have to tell Chrome, don't just go to the default gateway. Don't just go out to the internet. We need to tell Chrome, I want you to direct your requests through Zap. So we're going to go through the process within Chrome of saying, use a proxy, a non-transparent proxy. This is your IP, not mine, not the one in the lab. You're going to get a certificate error. That's okay. Just move through that. Yes, yes, yes. And then we're going to provide you credentials for authenticating to the application. And then we're going to step through a couple configuration changes, log back in, go back to Zap, spider some things, active scan some things, take a look at the results. And then confirm the results. This actually gives you the opportunity to interact with the web interface and do some manual enumeration, some manual testing, SQL injection. Pretty cool, pretty fun. This is, we could spend some time on this. So yeah, for sure. Fortunately, we just had a break, so you probably don't need a break right now, hopefully. So we're going to put 20 minutes on the clock. go through this, and then we'll come back together and go through it together slowly. All right. 20 minutes, work on the web testing lab, and we'll pick up shortly and review together methodically. Howdy, welcome back. Let's plow through web testing, and hopefully we didn't have a sneaky Windows update like Jeff did that cratered our Docker instance. I don't know. I'm making that up, Jeff, but sorry for the pain and anguish there. We'll that's a great cat wearing a cowboy hat image for sure. Okay, stop distracting me. Easily distracted. We're approaching 3 o'clock on day 4. We're on the downhill side for sure. We're gonna walk through this lab together. I'm gonna introduce you to a couple optional labs. We've got a section to cover primarily on Active Directory hardening. Oh, darn you, Ed. Darn you all to heck. In any case, there are tacos in the Discord, just totally uncool. But again, we're almost there, and you've been troopers today. Appreciate you as always. We'll walk through this lab. There's quite a few steps, and then again, I'll touch on a couple additional labs today. And of course, you're welcome to work on those as we close out the day. I think we're on target again for about our 3:30 and a little bit of time for Q&A at the end, kind of a time slice. But we'll see how we do. Let's step through the web testing lab. All right, I went back to where I was so that we consistently start. We need to fire up DVWA. We're going to open up an Ubuntu prompt. We're going to gather our IP address. There it is in all its glory. I'm going to do Control L to clear the screen. I'm going to move to the Intro Labs directory. I'm going to do Python 3 DSVW. Get it right this time. And again, we'll see that we've instantiated damn small vulnerable web on our WSL system. It's listening on 0000, which means it's listening on all available IP interfaces on WSL. We captured that moments ago. It's listening on port 65412. That is a non-standard web services port. Kind of back to the idea that is really just a service identifier. It can be just about anything. That is not the default, so we need to pay attention to that. Make sure it's up and running. Everything looks good. Let's go ahead, since some folks had trouble here. I'm going to go start OWASP Zap. That should come up even if you don't have it on your desktop. My desktop icon for some reason is like way over here. I don't know, on the right. Pretty regularly maintained and updated. So this is, of course, not the latest and greatest version, but you can acquire that from owasp.org. Again, one of many projects, many cool things. Somebody mentioned Juice Shop, I think, which is another cool, intentionally vulnerable application that you can play with. I want to say negative. I'm going to say do not persist. Thank you very much. I do not want updates right now. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to select our automated scan. And then, as mentioned, we're going to type in, or I don't know, did I capture it? Yep, I did. My WSL IP address. We're going to specify the port manually again, because that's non-default. Does that look right? 65412. And then once that all looks happy, then we're going to make sure, I think we wanted to do traditional, traditional spider, then attack. And we should shortly thereafter begin to see Zap go through the site, follow the links. We can move over to the alerts tab anytime we want while this is running away. We get some percentage, which is pretty cool. There may be multiple components of a scan, so you think you're just about done, and really it's only finished a phase of the scan, and it may pop to another phase, so just be forewarned. But we can let it churn away for a minute or two. We can pivot over to the alerts. This is pretty easy. Stop that. Pretty easy to see, to drill down into, to understand. Click each of these. You get a little explanation. They're ranked categorically, descriptively. Pretty cool. You know, again, not the end all be all. Definitely some things that that require additional enumeration, manual testing, manual enumeration, confirmation of finding, but overall, pretty straightforward, pretty simple and easy. You download installs app, step through a please stop updating prompt, feed it an IP URL within scope. You have permission to do this testing, and away we go. Excuse me. We done? Yeah, looks like we're done. Okay. Maybe we're not done based on damn Beaumont. Okay, we'll keep chucking. This is optional, but let's step through this together because I think it's pretty useful. I'm at an administrative PowerShell prompt. I'm gonna do Docker run. Did you get through this in the 20 minutes? Did you get through both of these? It'd be useful to know. If you didn't, again, obviously don't feel bad about that. I'm just curious if you made it through both. Okay, at least some of you did. Just curious. It helps to know if you're totally unfamiliar. This could be a little bit more daunting, and obviously you could spend a whole lot of time just poking around Zap if you wanted to. But okay, awesome. Thanks everybody. Yeah, that scan is still chugging away. All right. Docker run RMIT P80. Oh boy, that won't work well probably. 80 vulnerables web arg d. My goodness, dv. Never mind. I'm going to stop speaking and just keep typing. I did make up a couple subtle words today. Just decided not to focus on it. In any case, we'll see if this works. What did I do wrong? Docker run RMM. For crying out loud. You'd think I would just normally include T in IT, but not today. I put double. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Am I testing your patience? I'm testing my patience. Whew. All right. Looks like we're off to the races. Let's confirm our Windows IP address via ipconfig. We'll grab that because we can. Then we'll pivot over to Chrome. And remember, again, that if I just fire up my browser and start browsing as per usual, then my traffic is just being directed directly to the site in question or sites in question. So I need to go in and then tell my browser to go to Zap. And usually we'll use some sort of a proxy related plugin or tool to do that, because you can do this manually, but it's often a lot easier to use a browser plugin to change your proxy configuration settings in your browser. Okay, let's see here. Now this should just be port 80, I think, wasn't it? Probably should read the instructions. Is this next? Security warning? If I get a security warning, then that's good. Okay, sweet. So the security warning is because we're using a goofy self-signed cert from Zap. Under normal circumstances, you would run away screaming, but for the sake of this, we're going to proceed, even though it's unsafe. And we have arrived at DVWA. All is right in the world. Proceed, yes, trust me, this will work. Okay, admin and password. I think we're going to reset the testing database first, if I am not mistaken. Great, and reset. Just make sure that we're doing a clean test and we don't have residue. Admin Would you believe I did that on such rote that I don't remember what the password was? Wow. Okay. Now, if we go back to Zap, I'm assuming that our active scan is done by now. For crying out loud, let's just check. Okay, it's looking good. Now we should see an IP related to our most recent instantiation. So in this case, here we are, DVWA, my Windows address. And so we should be able to attack. What are we supposed to do first? Spider. Ow. And similarly, this is basically a redux of what we did before. We can do the active scan. I'm going to just keep on trucking for the sake of time. We'll see the similar results coming out. Slightly variation. We'll see our alerts as appropriate. Done. Watch the numbers grow. And then again, if you have time, energy, and effort, you can dig into these a little bit, see what you can see the pros, cons, upside, downsides, what you found, didn't find, and then at the very end, we give you an opportunity to play around with some SQL injection, play around with some command injection. Kind of cool, kind of fun. Illustrating that this is a fantastic place to start. Pretty easy to do, pretty accessible, I think, at this point. And like we mentioned 2, 3, 4, 7, 8 times, it's free. And the tools that we're using right now, the web application server, Juice Shop, lots of different opportunities for you to test this, to explore this as a process. Pretty fun. If you get excited about this, you have a bright career ahead of you, I think, in web application pen testing. So keep me posted. Okay. Let us plow ahead. Do want to just quickly talk about an optional lab, and you can circle back to this later. You can do it today. You can come back tomorrow, whatever works for you. We obviously talked about Nessus. Doing an actual Nessus scan lab is pretty challenging. I hear tell that we actually thought about doing that in a AWS environment and then firing up 100, 200, 500 Nessus instances and then scanning some AWS infra. And as you can see, with the scale and scope of this class, that might be a bad idea, might not be feasible. And not only that, it does take some time and et cetera, et cetera. So we sort of circumvented that, sort of shortcut that process. And we've created a Nessus lab for you. And really what it amounts to is reviewing Nessus reporting output. And so the idea, of course, behind that is that it is an opportunity for you to review the Nessus report output from the perspective that we talked about today. We talked about doing the categorization by plugin as opposed to categorization by IP or directly criticality, and it's super easy. You literally are just running the HTML report that's located on your file system, and it looks something like this. And then you can drill down into this and you can pay attention to the quantification. Here we have a bunch of singular entities by plugin. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see we have some that are significant reproductions of the same plugin. In this case, SSL certificate cannot be trusted. So this might be, based on our methodology, super simplified, maybe oversimplified, but at this point, you review the scan output, you review the most numerous plugin IDs. What's the criticality of this one? I think it's yellow, so that's a medium or a low. I can't really remember. I think high, medium. Yeah, I guess we could just click on it and stop guessing. Does it tell me? Medium. Can't believe you doubted me. So 49 mediums. Mediums are important. 49 of those. And this, again, is illustrative of the fact that you have some sort of SSL certificate issue. You got a problem. It's not just one, it's not just two, it's 49. And under the circumstances, that's a huge percentage of this scan environment. So what might you do to fix that? What's the root cause problem of that? And you can drill into the fact that you're using self-signed certs, or your certificate authority is having issues, or you forgot to renew, and then hopefully, ostensibly, you can find a solution that will manifest itself on all 4 of those 49 detections and check that one off your list, and then maybe move on to some additional certificate issues, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Come back to that later at your convenience. That's just sitting there on your file system for you to review should you want to. Yes, that's what I just said. Okay. Active Directory hardening. Well, this is another one that's near and dear to my heart. If I had to choose sort of 3 overarching, it's hard to pick, but application allow listing, advanced endpoint protection, Active Directory hardening, I think would be my top 3-ish. Active Directory is, as I mentioned a couple days ago, it is just the heart and soul of authentication, of identity and authentication in most enterprise environments. It's pretty much everywhere. And although there have been alternatives, contenders along the way, for the most part, Active Directory is just ubiquitous when it comes to certainly Microsoft environments. And it is that underlying critical service that if it were to crater tomorrow, it would impact almost all authentication in the typical enterprise. And so you couldn't log into anything. And I've had some pretty contentious conversations with enterprise folks, and I'm not talking about the sysadmins or the IT admins or the engineering staff. I'm talking about a couple layers up, and they want to talk about what's the most important application in your environment. And well, payroll. Well, that's fine. How do you log into the payroll portal? Well, with my username and password. Active Directory integrated? The answer is almost always yes. And now, of course, we're even extending that to our cloud accessible resources, our M365, et cetera. Seen some really, really unfortunate wake-up calls when you're using Active Directory federated services in an on-prem environment, Active Directory Federation services, in conjunction with Active Directory on-prem, authenticating to M365, and somehow, some way we missed the connection. ADFS goes down, or disruption of access to AD, and no one can log into their cloud resources. And it's like, their cloud resources, how can that be possible? This is just super important. And because it controls, for the most part in many enterprises, controls access, credentialed access to business critical resources, is it any wonder that the threat actors target this indirectly and or directly all the time? Certainly the pen testers do. And so we need to pay attention to this. And I'm sorry, for most of us, Active Directory has been around for a long, 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 long time. Again, circa 1999 for the original iterations. And as it does improve, after all that time, we're starting to talk about deprecating NTLM. Yes, that's good, but it hasn't changed dramatically. And instead, in most enterprises, it's just grown organically. There, I finally did it. I had a good one. It's grown organically. That's organic and gigantic all rolled into one. You're welcome. And it's become a nightmare. And then going back and fixing this, remember, I just talked about how critical it is and how it underpins so many things in the enterprise. Just go fix it or start over again. I've seen that, heard that many times. For better or for worse, about the only time I see that actually happen is when it burns to the ground in the middle of active incident response. And then it's tough. It is a hard day when you have to start from scratch and begin rebuilding your Active Directory environment. So let's not let that happen. Let's harden it to the best of our ability and keep it alive. Enumerating Active Directory not that many years ago was pretty tough. Again, if you think about a typical organization, an enterprise organization, and I did some expose not long ago against another healthcare organization, and they had about 15,000 users, which meant they also had about 15,000 contractors, which meant they also had several hundred, even a couple thousand student interns, whatever. So we're getting to the point of 40,000 user accounts. And then for better or for worse, they've been doing this for years. There were literally almost a group for every user account in their environment. So we're up to like 60,000 discrete components of Active Directory. And then we figure in desktops and servers and printers and applications. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of entries. And they've just grown. They've just morphed. And truth be told, for the most part, the people that have been administering Active Directory over the years and even currently are not necessarily security minded. In many instances, the help desk folk have direct access to make changes, add user accounts, create groups, on and on and on. And if this system has legitimately been in your environment for 5, 10, 15 years, sometimes 20 plus years, imagine the gaps. And then imagine trying to find a gap in the midst of 120,000 individual items in your Active Directory. It's really hard. Fortunately, we have some tooling. We have some tooling like Bloodhound that is free. It can be voluminous. This can be really challenging. It was designed, as we mentioned a little earlier in the week, it was designed to identify paths to domain admin. And the idea being, from a testing perspective or a threat actor perspective, if a threat actor gains access to an endpoint in your Active Directory environment, a typical Windows host, as a typical Windows user, Bob Smith, Sally Jones, then that threat actor is often looking for a way to elevate their privileges and ultimately get to domain admin, because domain admin gives them access to so many things in your environment and potentially allows them the ultimate path from the endpoint in question all the way to your domain controllers. Sometimes we think of, and it's not unreasonable to think of, if the threat actor can gain access to the KRB TGT, the ticket granting ticket account in Active Directory, then basically it's game over. They win. They own your Active Directory environment, and that's not a good day for anybody. That's the focus of this tool, and it's not a bad place to start. If you're just beginning to enumerate your Active Directory environment, this is okay. This is a simplistic diagram, frankly, that we see on this slide. And it may highlight a great many vulnerabilities. Bloodhound is indeed searching out many different ways to get from point A to point B, standard user to domain admin, whether it's group membership or active sessions and sometimes it's hard to derive actionable intelligence from this. Not impossible, but sometimes, again, just based on the volume scope of the data, it can be challenging. So Plumhound came along. There's lots of different, there's like Bluehound, Plumhound, Bloodhound. There's probably other hounds. It's sort of a proliferation, an amalgamation of additional tooling, additional analysis components. So keep your eye out for those kinds of things. I'm probably missing several, but Plumhound is a reporting engine. It is the intent of Plumhound is to help you take the information that you glean from Bloodhound, and really, just so you're aware, effectively all that Bloodhound is doing a bunch of queries against your Active Directory environment for the most part. It's configurable. You can point it at a domain. You can point it at an OU. You can give it credentialed access, etc. But basically, it's just doing a bunch of queries against Active Directory, a bunch of LDAP queries as a general rule. I have seen this trigger alarms in enterprise environments. Think user behavior analytics in particular, and I have seen it go completely undetected in many, many instances, which is kind of astonishing. The weird thing about Active Directory, it's like it's this compendium of security information, and yet every authenticated user in your environment has access to read most of the data that's stored in Active Directory. Like, wait, what? Again, think of it as an actual directory, like a phone book, if you will. The point is to make resources accessible, and that's directly in conflict with all that we do for a living. Back to Plumhound. Free tool that can literally help you then make sense of your Bloodhound data and turn around and do something meaningful, something useful in your environment. Sometimes these are super easy changes. Not always, but So this basically is a compendium of things that can be extracted and then reported on from a Bloodhound data perspective. And it's not just straight up, is John Smith a member of the domain admins group? It's a whole list of things, and there are a bevy of queries that go into Bloodhound. And so the opportunity, again, to sort this into meaningful, actionable chunks is pretty powerful. To break them down by checks and say, what do you care about? Should we review Kerber roastable users? Should we review admin groups? Should we review local admin accounts? Should we review passwords never expire? And the answer, of course, is yes. Hound, I like it. User to local admin, indirect user to local admin groupings. What we often see, and this is just so easy to misconfigure, especially over the years, not least of which with job changes, role changes, sort of scope creep in your permissions. You start off in one role, you move to another role that has entirely different duties, and we don't take away all of your Active Directory permissions. We just give you some new ones to facilitate the use of your job, and then you get put in another group and another group and another group, and that tertiary group is part of a group that is connected with IT admins. And again, you get the idea. My favorite is circular group references, when you're in a group that references another group that references the original group, and your head explodes. And it's just a nightmare. And some of that is actually feasible within Active Directory. This can help. This can help take this monumental ball of twine that's just crazy complicated and say, okay, stop, focus, let's fix this one. Let's fix this one. Mimikatz, Mimi. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. Mimikatz makes more sense to me. I feel silly saying Mimikatz, but who cares? This is an incredible tool. Boy, it changed the landscape of our jobs a few years back, and it was the quintessential sales pitch. If you didn't know this could happen, along comes the tool called Mimikatz with a cool little kiwi icon, and we can pull your password directly out of memory in plain text, and everybody fell out of their chairs and scrambled to buy an EDR or scrambled a patch, even though there wasn't a patch that fixed this, or. So it definitely has a claim to fame. It definitely is leveraged by the threat actors. It's definitely leveraged by the pen testers. And I'm sure it's completely coincidental that we're talking about Bloodhound versus Mimikatz, right? I don't know. But it can be leveraged as a testing tool in your environment. And it's worth potentially taking a look at, specifically from a detection perspective. Talk about a red team or an atomic red team kind of opportunity exercise. If your security tools do not detect execution or interactions with Mimikatz, might be time to consider alternatives. You need to know about this, because for real, it's pretty heinous if a threat actor can get into your environment, and or a pen tester can get in your environment and leverage this functionality. Test, detect. Be careful on this one. It's most likely going to set off a lot of alarm bells. So just be forewarned. It's not something you can usually wield without someone noticing or detecting, but Pincastle is basically, it's a commercial version, sort of akin to the idea of Bloodhound, just costs some money. I understand that the licensing model allows free for internal use. I haven't used this tool a lot. I've never really in an internal enterprise environment had the budget for this. I've used Bloodhound and some reporting tools regularly. I'm not exactly sure how this compares and contrasts. I've heard very, very positive things about it. If you've hung around Black Hills information security at all, if you've hung around John Strand at all, it probably won't shock you to know that we're pretty keen on the idea of deception technologies. And I think the reason that we like it, other than that it's cool, the thing that we love about it is finding that high fidelity, actionable alert is like, it's like the gold standard. It's the It's the ultimate goal for what we're trying to do from a detection and response perspective. If you can give me an alert, and if I see that alert fire, it means with a high degree of confidence something evil this way cometh, then beautiful. Talk about alert fatigue, talk about false positive, et cetera, et cetera. And so we can, in many instances, set traps, if you will, for threat actors in our environment. And John does some great classes on this. John's written a book on this. It's really, really a fascinating topic, and it is extremely accessible, in my humble opinion. It's just something that you can do to create a high fidelity tripwire in your environment in like 5 minutes. No joke. So the idea here is you can create a bogus user. You can create a bogus administrative user. The user actually exists in Active Directory. We're actually going to assign it privileges so that it's a tempting target to a threat actor. Naturally, the threat actor is going to enumerate highly privileged accounts, domain administrator, enterprise admin, schema admin, whatever. And then we're going to go, of course, one step further, and we're going to set the login hours to absolutely nothing so that this account effectively can't be used, but it is this tempting target. And the chances that the threat actor is going to enumerate beyond identification of an admin account are slim to none. And if we see interactions with this account, we need to configure active alerting. Somehow we can create, if we have a UEBA solution or a SIM solution or something, step 1, create the account. Step 2, restrict the account so it can't actually be used for authentication, meaning there are no times it's allowed to log in, and then create an alerting structure for detecting activity related to this account, and boom. Free, essentially. Doesn't take very much time, and it is just one example among many that can give us this high fidelity. If this red light starts flashing, you should probably pay attention. I love it. Talk about high value, bang for your buck. We love it when testers cry. I collect their tears. It makes the best wine. These are legitimate traps that will stop and or identify or catch the pen tester and catch the threat actor. And there's definitely synergy right there. And no joke, how long do you think it would take you to implement that in your environment? And what do you have to lose? What could possibly go wrong as long as you engineer that properly? You have authority, authentication to do it, and you create up that alerting structure. You should absolutely be paying attention to your domain administrator credentials. Please, oh, please, oh, please, oh, please. Thank you. This is another example of a way to approach deceptive technologies. This is Honey Badger, and this creates a macro with a beacon. And the idea behind this is that we can stage files in our environment in a place that users should not go, for example, and then we can actually embed a beacon or a homing beacon network component to this executable so that we can actually see where the threat actors are originating from if they interact with this macro. Kind of a cool idea. Here's the overarching script. Here's the steps for compilation. And then here is, in theory, the ability to detect where the beacon is with a pretty high degree of accuracy. We now know that our threat actor is located at the Louisville Marriott downtown, for example. I can't help but tell you a really quick story because this just kicks it off in my mind. I worked a ransomware incident not long ago, and it was a family-run organization, a fairly sizable printing organization, but family-run. And the gentleman who was still in charge was late 80s, and he was having a little bit of a difficult time understanding the nature of a ransomware outbreak in their environment. And I made the horrible mistake of saying, we really shouldn't proceed with restoration of systems and services because for all we know, at this point on our limited analysis, the threat actor could still be in the building. And of course, he took me literally, and in all seriousness, he started to get up out of his chair, and his son helped run the business. He's like, Dad, where are you going? And he's like, I'm going to go to the truck and get my gun. He's like, what do you mean? This is Tennessee. So just so you're aware. And I'm like, okay, he's not literally in the building. And no joke, he was going to go to the truck and get a firearm, and we were going to hunt down that threat actor in the building, and that was going to be the end of that, which kind of would have been fascinating. But so careful in your choice of words, especially if you're in East Tennessee. Just saying. It was hard not to laugh. He was so sincere, though. It's like, we're going to get him. He's trying to ruin our business. Anyway. Yeah, Honey Badger Link came and went. Yeah, go all John Wick. That's what we do in Tennessee. So I'm told. I don't know. This is an illustration of the value potentially of that particular scenario, the honey badger, and then the geographical location, the beacon. This is an illustration from an actual test that I understand that John participated in, where we ran this sort of a solution in a banking environment for a couple of weeks, and then we're able to convey, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm a huge fan of infographics that convey a message without having to dig into the minutia. We don't have to get nerdy here. We just have to say, we did a little testing, and we enumerated the folks that are attacking us around the world in this 2-week time period. Would you like to see that image? Bam. And talk about an attention grabber. Holy smokes, the universe is out to get us, and it can be an incredible learning moment. We're not at this point in time suggesting you hack back against all these folks. That's an entirely different training session. Just kidding. Just kidding. Threat intel. I kind of wish I kind of wish that we could do a poll the audience and see how you feel about the phraseology threat intel or threat intelligence. I don't know. It's another one of those things that garners an emotional response from a lot of us, and probably reasonably so, at least in part because we're not sure what the heck it means, specifically, tactically, pragmatically. I'm excited about the idea behind it, assuming that we agree on what the idea behind it is. I mean, what is the goal? What do we mean by threat intel? And I think, simply put, we're trying to learn about threats. We're trying to learn about threats that exist, that are actually occurring in the wild. And then we're trying to take that information and see, does it apply to us? Threat and vulnerability. If I don't have a vulnerability to that threat, I don't really care about that intel. But if I have a legitimate threat, real world, actually occurring, and I have an associated vulnerability, then all of a sudden I care a lot. And that's an opportunity, of course, to make educated improvements to my defensive posture to make sure that I'm okay, that we can survive that particular torpedo hit. And, what we're saying is that deception technology, it belongs in your arsenal. That belongs in your arsenal, and it can potentially inform threat intelligence, and it can potentially do things that are just directly pragmatic in your environment. You don't really need to understand all of the threat vectors associated with a threat actor pivoting towards domain admin. I'm all for the understanding. I'm all for the intelligence, but you don't really have to have that to set up a trap related to access to an administrative account and have a high fidelity detection for the win. And that's the overarching idea. Kent Ickler works for BHIS as a tester, and this is an observation. We eat our own dog food. We take our own medicine. We follow our own advice for the most part. And so this is us legitimately paying attention through all of the applied techniques that we just talked about and gaining insight, talk about threat intelligence by monitoring these different components of our environment. And John actually received this. This is not fabricated. Received this informational alert from Kent and said, "Look, and we're paying attention to all these varied components. We've got these canaries, these deception technologies, this visibility into all these different things, and we are seeing a pattern. And the pattern is somebody in the Netherlands is out to get us. And John, being John, went on Twitter and said, if you're in the Netherlands and you're attacking BHIS, would you please stop it? And of course, the story continues with John receiving a direct response, a direct message saying, how on earth did you see this? How did you find this? How could you possibly have identified this? And the answer is, there you go. Deceptions, canaries, service monitoring. And this is pretty powerful. This is pretty powerful. And you didn't have to spend $500,000. You didn't have to spend $50,000. You didn't have to spend $10,000. And in at least a limited capacity, you gained that highest ideal, highest ideology of actionable high fidelity alerting, which is pretty cool. Lots more there. We could talk about that all day probably. So
oh snap,
we're almost done.
Why did I just hear myself?
And let's
Check.
Let's take a quick look at this final lab, optional lab. I'm not going to thrust this upon you today. You can come back to it later. You can decide to do it, not do it. I do want to, however, point out the bevy of components, the bevy of lab options available to you. I'm not really sure why I decided to use the word bevy today on multiple occasions, but let's just run with it. Cyber deception, active defense. There's this whole section that you may not have noticed if you didn't scroll down that far.
Check.
And then we do have the
check.
honey user
Check.
available here.
Interesting.
I do get mic testing coming through, I think, or maybe that's just me. Check baby, 1, 2, 3. So speaking of check, you can pop in here, take a look at this lab. Again, we're not going to. You're welcome to use the remainder of the time today to do this if you want to, but I'm tired. You're tired. We've accomplished our goal here, our mission together this week. You've been the world's greatest audience as usual, but you can check this out, and you'll remember the user gen bat, and you can step through the process of evaluating basically the creating the honey user, the tempting user, and then and seeing the output. Basically, we'll engineer a poor man's sim, if you will, for some event log alerting, and it's pretty cool. Again, illustrative of the process and the purpose. And that's 3:30. Man, my timing is just exceptional, don't you think? That's the real reason that the timer between labs is so wonky, is that I'm making it so I end exactly at 3:30. No, I'm not that clever.
My device changed.
Are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here. And it wasn't my mute, I wasn't unmuted. Now I can't talk. There is quite a few questions that Brian Walla kind of came in Zoom. I don't know if you want to go through those.
Sure.
Do you want me to read them and you answer them?
That, let me just summarize them. I paid attention to them.
Okay.
And so let me summarize, and then I'll respond, because Brian and I are having a sort of a side conversation, which is awesome. And Brian has some experience, obviously, from a vulnerability management perspective. And I'm going to pause really quickly right there. Obviously, we're moving into Q&A. We're moving into Ask Me Anything. If you're done, you're tired, you're sick of listening to me talk, totally understood, and you need to go, then thank you for being here. Love you all to death. If you have issues or questions or comments, or you want to stay connected, find me on LinkedIn or DM me through Discord. I hope that this is the beginning of a long-standing relationship, and sincerely so thankful for you all being here. If you have to leave, I'll say goodbye to the rest of you in a minute. So yeah, Brian obviously has some vulnerability management experience, and he's saying, he didn't actually say this, but I'm pretty sure what he's thinking is, dang, your approach is genius, but I've done it a little different and maybe a little better, which is awesome. I'll take it all day, every day. Brian's saying, yeah, I like it. Categorizing categorizing vulnerabilities in the way that we discussed. And then he's suggesting that in his experience that he's gone one step further or maybe slightly divergent and said, I'm categorizing things based on protocol and port, or protocol and port combination, which is a really cool, sort of different prioritization methodology, which I like. And Brian is also saying that it actually worked, which is pretty important information. And my only thought there and question, Brian is saying, have I approached it that way, or have I thought about it that way? And the answer is, sort of. Sometimes it depends. And I think that Brian's thoughts in this discussion work beautifully for external vuln management and for network infrastructure management, or et cetera. And I'm not sure that translates directly to, let's say, agent-based nessus enumeration of Windows systems and patching third-party apps. And so I think what we are saying is that that you have multiple approaches to prioritization and to categorization, and it depends on what you're scanning, depends on what you're patching, depends on what you're monitoring. And so I think having just the overarching idea of high-level prioritization that's not necessarily directly tied to an IP or a CVE. So yeah, thank you for that thought process, Brian. I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's just another sort of approach that could be super useful, depending on what you're responsible for.
It looks like there's another question. Aside from enterprise solutions, is Windows Defender good for personal use, or would you recommend a better solution?
Oh boy, that is a fantastic question, and boy, it depends. That's the quintessential answer, right? I confess, on my home systems, I use Defender. Now, I'm pretty careful. I'm pretty cautious. I think I've done a fairly good job of educating my family to be careful and cautious, and I don't worry too much about it. I think it's decent. The detection prevention capabilities are not bad. Is it the best? No. But is it the best free solution? Maybe, probably for Windows. So for home, I think it's probably okay. I think it's probably fine. If I had the money to layer on a personal CrowdStrike tenant or a Sentinel-1 tenant or something, I would do it. But all things being equal, it's not too bad.
We also have a question here in Zoom. I'm a total newbie and hence not knowing much at all. Great training sessions. One question that's been bothering me for quite some time. What's the potential risk of a malicious actor getting access to switches inside a corporate environment? What security controls could they possibly bypass? And what would still keep them from doing harm to the organization? Would it allow immediate access to corporate network resources? Hope this isn't a silly question.
That is a silly question. No, it is not a silly question.
Not a silly question, of course.
I've asked a few silly ones in my life. That is not among them. That is a fantastic question, and it's a bit nuanced. But I'll give you a generalized response. I think a couple things. In general, a switch or switches. Okay, this is killer. If you actually could gain access, authenticated access to a switch or switches, my first fear is that the authentication is identical for every switch in the enterprise. That's really common. And it might actually then get you into the routers and all the rest of the network infrastructure, which is, at the very least, you could do a horrific denial of service. I've actually seen threat actors, not very often, but I've actually seen them manipulate access credentials on network infrastructure and effectively lock the enterprise out. Ouch. That's a really bad day. Now, that's not their first course of action, the threat actor, that is, as general rule. If you're sitting on a switch, do you have access potentially to critical data that's passing through that switch? And the answer is, you betcha. That's exactly when you don't want to be using Telnet. when you don't want to be using authentication with plain text credentials. Now, hopefully, most of the traffic that's traversing your environment internally is encrypted. Is it? Maybe, maybe not. Depends. We're moving that direction, but I would venture a guess that there's a fair amount of unencrypted traffic that's transiting that switch that could be valuable to your organization. Those are the kinds of things that I worry about as much as anything else. And that could just be the beginning. How did they get there? Of course, in the first place, switch is not usually directly accessible from the interwebs. Could be through a misconfiguration. But anyway, that's a fantastic question. And so much so that I better stop talking about it because I could go on forever. But great question.
Don't know if there's any questions that we haven't gotten to. Let's see. Yes, the certificates of completion will be emailed to you as long as you registered. If you registered through the Antisyphon page, you will get a certificate of completion. So what John usually does at the end of these, Patterson, is he thanks everybody, right? So we don't just thank the people that paid, but we definitely want to give all the people that paid a big, huge round of applause. Thank you for contributing and allowing us to be able to do these classes. So everybody give them a gigantic round of applause to everybody that paid. We thank you. We couldn't do this without you guys.
So true. Yep.
But he also likes to thank the people that didn't pay. John obviously came from a pretty, poor upbringing. He knows what it's like to not have the money to do things. So you guys show up and you pay us with your time. You pay us with spreading the word. And so everybody, please give everyone that didn't pay a huge round of applause because we appreciate all of our students, not just the ones that pay.
100%.
So thank you. John does it way better. Usually people are crying and, I definitely didn't do it justice like he did, but thank you guys so much for coming and joining us this week. You will get your certificate of completion. Please spread the word. Post it on socials. Tell your friends about our classes. We're always looking for new people to join our community, join the Discord servers, come to our Ask Me Anythings, come to our webcast and our summit next week. And we just really appreciate everybody. And thanks, Patterson, for filling in. It was really such a different experience with you teaching it. It's just from a different perspective. And I think that was extremely valuable. So thank you so much for coming in this week. We appreciate you.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's fun hanging out with you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, no joke. It really is.
It's intense, but it's fun.
I'm exhausted, but it's an amazing community. And I really feel like, not to just sound silly, speaking of silly, just like we can all be friends here, which is so unusual for a large distributed group of basically strangers. So it's pretty awesome.
It is. It's so awesome. I think the most awesome thing that I see in these classes that, we have our nerd herders, of course, which we love, and they come in and help, and they come in, but we get them from the people that come to these classes, and they help each other and like answer each other's questions. And I just think that's so cool. And it's so different from the way that cybersecurity used to be. It used to be like, you had to be kind of part of the cool club in order to party with the cool people. But we're really trying to change that dynamic by making it accessible to everyone with these free classes. So we definitely are breaking down the barriers, or we're hoping to anyway. We're definitely taking some bricks out of the wall for sure.
Yeah, the way the whole class comes together in a community and helps everyone out is probably one of the good things about the class that I always love. Just
I know,
people
it's so
jumping in and
neat.
going, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, here's a
I
link
know.
for this, here's a link for that.
Exactly. Well, I think with that, I don't see any other questions. Again, thanks everybody for joining us this week. And we'll see you in the next class, or maybe we'll see you in the summit next week. Join us again as soon as you can. And I think with that, Ryan, we can go ahead and kill it with fire. Again, thanks, Patterson.
Thank you.
Go get some tacos.
Oh man, tacos and beer.
Enchiladas, burritos.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.